Wednesday session of Kansas State Board of Education is called to order. We have 9 members present. At this time, a motion would be in order to approve today's agenda. Sally and Dina, discussion? If not all in favor, please raise your hand. All opposed? Motion carries. We are excited to have an update on Kansas Can Vision outcomes. Beth, Stacy, Brandon, perhaps others, it says. Hey, Stacy, welcome.
Be here reporting on our great successes this year related to the implementation of the individual plan of study, our post-secondary success group, and the graduation initiative. Just to touch base, this all goes back to consensus building across the state, the vision tour where Department of Education met with business and industry leaders, parents, communities, engaged constituents to develop the initiatives to help lead our state forward in educating our children. What Kansans said they want from their schools was made clear through those conversations, and we've developed the initiatives to direct our schools to support that. Collaboration within the communities, pulling in business and industry to inform the education cycle. Dynamic roles for counselors and social workers, and revitalizing that important work that takes place in schools. Changes addressing culture within schools. Kansas children needing quality preschool experiences to develop those key literacies that'll help them be successful in all of the core disciplines, as well as their chosen electives. Organizing schools around the student, not the system, and placing community service and civic participation as a priority. A look at what Kansans said they wanted those characteristics of the successful high school graduate to be showed that engagement with our neighbors, with our fellows, with our peers, the non-academic skills were in need of encouraged emphasis. So that brings me to my area. We'll talk about the individual plan of study and the work that we have been doing to support that initiative. Your goals for us and the schools in the state of Kansas were that this year, every middle school and high school would have implemented an IPS tool and a process by the end of the 2017-2018 year. And our goal going forward for this year will be that every student, beginning in the middle grades, will have an IPS in 2018 and 2019. That center of the IPS at a convergence of what students enjoy doing, what they love doing, what the world needs and expects from our citizens, what they can make a viable income doing to support their communities, and what they feel like they're good at, interests, aptitudes, helping students explore and recognize the opportunities and make choices within their own educational development are what we want to encourage and support. The professional development we did in the fall centered around looking at the K-12 system by the district participants and then figuring out what they can do in a layered way to support that development over a period of time. So how do elementary students explore an awareness of the world and the opportunities of work that their parents participate in, seeing something besides just what their parents do, but the other opportunities that are available within their communities. Career exploration within the middle school years, and then a transition into high school that develops a sharp focus around career preparation opportunities and giving them multiple choices and avenues to look at how they fit into society. And then a transition into post-secondary. Some of our students are exploring those opportunities while they're in high school and post-secondary and the junior and senior year have converged for them, which is a wonderful opportunity. And then looking at career advancement, lifelong learning, and how opportunities will continue to unfold in our changing and dynamic society. In the fall, we had that Roadshow that helped develop that K-12 system, brought district leaders together, a teacher, a counselor, and a principal usually, to think about how they can spread that curriculum across multiple partners and not just have one conversation between a counselor and a student, but to empower all of their teachers to participate in that career advisory model. In the spring, we developed a Building Hope campaign where we brought in more teachers and talked specifically about how teachers can support groups of 15 students at a time in a seminar or an advisory period to have real conversations about student aptitude and where the opportunities are for them. Developed a wonderful training manual that I can provide copies for you, to you. I did not bring those with me, but I can get you a link or copies of that training manual that breaks down the different scenarios that teachers can use in those conversations. We conducted a survey of our schools to see what their needs were, where they felt the significant hurdles were in their implementation. Staffing was identified as the largest barrier that they face. As you look at that and think about the career advising model, it sounds like maybe the message isn't getting through to some of the teachers that they need to pick up their share of the load and engage in those conversations. Of course, you hear from small districts in the survey, and I don't want to mention the district name, but for the first time in probably 10 years, they've got a half-time counselor on staff, which is a big change for that small group of students. They've got the career cruising tool in place, probably not as vigorous because they brought it on towards the end of the school year. I'd say they're just a tad behind, but they're making all the important steps, and we'll get them caught up this fall with building teacher capacity. The process and the curriculum are still something that a few of the districts are trying to hone, how they support teachers or encourage teachers to have those conversations. If you haven't looked at business and industry data as a teacher, then you don't necessarily know where the opportunities are. And so having more conversations to support teachers this fall will be important. That's a very busy wheel. Kent Reed's probably the one to help break that down for you, but what we've done is brought together several of the emphasis that are important for counselors. Character development, personal development, and social development are the outside portion of that wheel. And then they think into some of your Kansas Can competencies, and then also look at the specific activities that teachers will participate in with students. So that's very busy for you, but when the counselors look at it, it allows them to pull together the three different layers of what they do within the schools and figure out how it all connects back together. It makes perfect sense to them when you put it in front of them, and has really been an empowering tool. Kansas Can competencies are central to the employability skills that we're looking at helping districts encourage within these students. And we will have a fall roadshow in August and September that will deal with the SECD standards, Kansas Can competencies, and we're layering in portions of the IPS to get more bang for our buck out of that professional development. So those two initiatives are working together, and then we'll follow up in September and October with an additional round of IPS-specific training. I dug into KSDE data yesterday. It's the first opportunity I've had to break down some of the IPS relevant questions that districts answered in that document. Last October, when I met with you, I said there were 41 districts that were having a little bit of trouble documenting. Through our spring professional development, we were able to reduce that number from 41 to 8. Of those 8, only 2 did not have an IPS tool identified. As this KSDE data came in, and we will break this down for you, our research analyst is working on that this morning. We'll break that down by board region And we've got 10 very sophisticated questions that show, have they engaged with a portfolio? Do they have work-based learning experiences? What are they doing with the IPS? And so we'll be able to get that information out to you for your local schools. But on the basis of this information, there are 2 districts that are a little bit farther behind than everybody else and will need some encouraged support to get up to speed in August. So I think it's a very successful implementation year. And I think if we get the ball rolling early this fall, that we can support every student having an IPS.
I don't want to, do not identify the districts, but are they large, medium, small?
The 2, one's large and one's small, and I think they might be underreporting. They might not, they might have a pretty high expectation, which you do as well. I think they're doing more than they acknowledge within the survey.
Okay, thank you. Sally?
For my personal use later, not right now, but if they are in my district, I want to know.
Yes, ma'am.
Ann?
Thank you. At the Impact Institute, the thing we went to down in Emporia, I went to a workshop on IPS, and it was really good. I mean, the school that presented it was really doing a good job, but one of the comments she made was, well, you know how this goes in most schools, or a lot of schools, I think is what she said. They just check it off, but they're not really doing it. So how do we know, even if their survey says they're doing it, that they're doing it?
One of the things that we've been working on within the career and technical education team is a work-based learning portfolio rubric. And so we've had some technical assistance from the College and Career Readiness Center in developing this rubric. And so it would be a portfolio that could be housed directly within career cruising. There would be several extract points upon completed components within that. So when it came down to resume, when it came down to career exploration, the aptitude interest survey, those would be housed in an identifiable location, and then we would have the extract points that we could go get. We wouldn't go get the whole portfolio, but we would be able to verify that there was a tool in place for assessment, and then it would be a matter of whether we want to look at some type of monitoring.
So if they're not using career cruising, then
It could be done in Google Forms, Google Docs by the district. It doesn't have to be a purchase platform.
so we
It
have
could be
somebody
cruising,
though
it could be
who's looking
modules.
at that? We have somebody on staff who's looking at that to make sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing?
We are not right now drilling into those portfolios to examine those.
Okay. I mean, it's such a key piece of everything that happens later. We just have to make sure they're doing it and not checking a box somewhere and say, yeah, we got that done.
And there'll be a little bit of the OBT chair that does some of that look. But on many things that we do, we have to rely on the local board to oversee much of that, with some oversight. We just don't have enough staff to do
Oh, I
deep
know.
compliance at each of those
what
levels. So
concerns me.
we rely on local boards, we rely on OBT chairs, and we'll be able to know who has implemented, and we'll be able to track those big outcomes. But
Well, I know, it's like, Shawnee Heights, I have a good friend on the board, and I'm going, what are you guys using for IPS? And she goes, what's that? So I'm not sure we can count on the local boards, because they just don't know all this language and what this means and what they're supposed to be doing.
I would go back to consumer demand as well. IPS is probably a term that parents don't identify with yet. I mean,
Right.
we're new enough in the initiative, so if you talk to the parents about where they're doing career exploration or what a career awareness are they developing, they might recognize that more quickly than they'll recognize IPS. But the more this becomes an expectation and parents know there's an opportunity out there, then they're gonna demand that from their buildings.
Maybe
from
it just
their
takes
boards.
time to get the word out.
Mr. Chair, I was pleased yesterday in our reports from the schools for accreditation. There were, I think, at least 2, if not 3 schools who were, it mentioned directly the IPS implementation. and the accreditation model is going to be one of those things, you're doing what we asked you to do. And I concur with Ann that there are several things that have to be noted in some way, collecting information to know that the schools know they're being held accountable for implementation. This is a core value of our board and our direction and our vision. So, yeah, and when we're working together on the summary reports, the executive summary, this could be one of the things that we place in there. But there are other options, other things that should be happening as well. But I also believe that the terminology is more universal for us here, IPS or ESI or another anachronism that of other things that I have had the same conversations, even with teachers. Well, we don't do IPS. I don't know what that is. And then, well, do you do career cruising? Oh, yeah, we do that. So, but at the same time, we need some standardization of terminology. But we really do need to verify that districts are indeed following through on these. And I have to say, I was pleased that, in the reports that we received yesterday, that the schools were being challenged to get past the implementation stage or the introduction stage of IPS. So it's going in the right direction. But I agree with you, Ann, this is really one of our core values and we need to be really pushing it, holding people's feet to the fire on this.
Dina?
Stacy, does the question just have a manner for them to check?
Yes.
So it does not ask what they're using? So they have to identify?
We do have the list of career cruising schools, that specific tool, and that's probably 90% of our districts.
But the school district does not, or the school does not have to identify what they're using with students. Because if they did, that might make them have a little more buy-in to the fact that you are checking and not just, oh, I can get by with just checking, putting a check mark.
We'll get the KSDE accreditation list out to you. And I think once you look at the different components and how they're identifying, you're going to get a feel for the wide range of activities that schools are participating in. So the career cruising's one career aptitude kind of sorting vehicle for that. But the number of schools that have launched back into college visits, building that awareness. The first time I stepped on a college campus, I was 18 and I was enrolling. And so, I think we've got junior high kids that are engaged in STEM activities in Manhattan this morning in Derlin Hall.
Right.
And so you've got junior high kids that are being exposed to post-secondary opportunities that, I only dreamed about when I was in our high school. So I would look past the career cruising portion of it, which is a small snippet, and then recognize they've got work-based learning experiences, they've got portfolios, they've got conversations that they're having with teachers that are probably more important than an interest survey, because what is any 15-year-old boy interested in? I mean, you could stereotype and label, but they're only interested in what they've had exposure to. And so looking back at those aptitudes and skills that they have, and then building the awareness of what those opportunities aren't something that can really take place as robustly. But yeah, we've asked, and I can get that list from you, from Kathleen to get to you, and it'll identify whether they've got career cruising, or whether they're using Naviance, whether they're looking at some of the ACT products, or whether they're using a Google form or a Google spreadsheet.
Well, and I think the other components are also important. So I do agree that they need to be there as well. And I have a grandson who just graduated, and I asked him what they were using, and he knew the name of it and knew that it was career cruising, and said it really was helpful. So I can see that if you ask kids what's going on, they also can tell you some very definite specifics. So perhaps asking the adults is not always the one that we need to be asking, because they are working with the students, and making certain that they're doing that is really what we're after.
Okay,
So, thank you.
there are several questions. I want to ask one first, though. Going back to the barriers, whenever we first started this process, I got a lot of calls, or when I was visiting, about, we're dumping all this on the counselor. Well, that wasn't, that's not the only system. So if staff, 56%, 50.7% of if I'm a superintendent out in some area, and I recognize that I want to use the advising model, and so I'm going to have to use everybody in my school instead of just the counselors, where do I go to get the professional development to help my staff understand the importance of and how to implement that model?
Right now to the service center nearest you, because we will bring that professional development to them, and for $25 a seat, which covers their lunch and keeping the lights on, they can get a full day of professional development that the state's paying for.
Okay.
We had 2 of those road shows and serviced probably about 1,100 people. We'll have them continuing this fall, and we are developing some Moodle training. So you'll be able to log into a platform and go through that training manual, and we'll break it down into probably 20-minute segments so they don't get a whole day's worth of learning, but it's kind of learning on demand. So if they're in the far reaches of the Netherlands, then they've got a platform that they can go to get some of that professional development.
Okay, thank you. Janet?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My concern is we're starting them off in middle school with this career cruising or, this, but kids' interests change as they get exposed to other areas. So how are we handling that? Because that, I guess, is the thing that bothers me. If we give that one test or that career cruising, we're not going to keep them in that one forever, because I've got grandchildren that have had this, and, I know they've changed, throughout their school career.
Yeah, that's a plan that they should visit formally twice annually, just to double check and see, based upon their experiences, whether they're continuing down that path. The introductory courses within a lot of the pathways or experiences that students have are a chance to learn more about it. It doesn't mean that you're stuck in a track. We expect our students to be pretty fluid, experiencing multiple different pathways and trajectories, and becoming aware of all of the different opportunities at 4-year, 2-year, and in the world of work as school to registered apprenticeships begin to become recognized around our state in different ways.
Would it be accurate to say that one of the most important parts of the exploratory process is also finding what you're not interested in?
Yeah.
So you can eliminate having to spend 3 years in college before you
Invest. Yeah.
before you do that. Sally.
When we did the survey
Sally has a
results-
question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Did you want to answer that more? Finish your thought process.
I was going to point out on the K-5 career awareness, since we kind of talked about middle school just a little bit and then trying out things you don't know, that when we sent out the survey, we had elementary schools respond, we want to answer what we're doing with IPS. And so where they're layering in the STEM experiences that show connections to science, to be a scientist, or connections to math and engineering or robotics. Those are pretty robust programs in 4th and 5th grade if you look at First Lego and some of the tournaments that go on. So it's great to see our elementary schools robustly talking about the world of work and opportunity.
Okay, now may I ask my question?
You had your chance.
I'm going to whine. I'm going to take us in just a little bit different direction. I'm really pleased on how this is going. My biggest concern about the individual plans of study is that counselors would just go in and take the file of the student and say they have a plan because they have what they're going to take in each level. And that isn't what we wanted. We want this to truly work. So I think we're going in the right direction on that part. But I want to talk about the teacher, because you're training these teachers to help in some of this. My concern is that we have a lot of teachers out there that have only known the world of school. That's all they've done, is they've gone to school. But yet they are needing to help students in other careers and interests. And I can understand how they can help them with the interests, but do we have any plan down the future of seeing if we can get teachers into some of these workforce areas so they have a little experience of what's needed in these areas too? And I know this might be phase 2 of something, or phase 3, and may not even be underneath you, but I think we might be needing to broaden. Steve always talks about how we need to take somebody in business and industry and put them in the classroom because they have the knowledge. I think we need to get the teachers out in business and industry also. Do we have a plan for that, or?
A lot of school districts have got externship opportunities in place for their teachers, and then there are business and industry partners that fund some of those externships as well. We don't have anything in the works at this point to scale up teacher participation in those kinds of activities, but it is something that a lot of districts recognize the need for, and so some thought about how we can continue to support that, message that, and then maybe facilitate those relationships with business and industry would be a strong step.
I have an idea. Imagine that. I don't know if it's even possible, okay? But we have this wonderful committee that Ann's on career and technical ed. And on that, we have some business and industry. And I know when I served on that, sometimes business and industry, they wanted to help us more than what we are using them. And I was wondering if that might not be a good avenue for resources for business and industry across the state, that they could help us develop something that teachers could participate in. And that's just something we already have that already could use the people that we've already got in place, because they're helping us in what the kids need to know. Maybe they would help us in what the teachers need to know too. That's just an idea. Threw it out there.
Thank you.
No more questions.
A little bit shorter. All right. Good morning, everybody. How's everybody doing this morning? You guys have a busy 3 days, huh? Glad to see you're still awake, ready to talk to me. Appreciate it. I'm here to talk about graduation, give you a little update on how we're doing. Just to kind of like Stacey a little bit, come back to your guys' vision, plan, what we have as a state going forward, and talking about this result, high school graduation. This is data, everybody's favorite thing to look at, right? There it is on the board. Remember, this is 2017, 16, and 15. We do not have 18 data yet. We don't get that cleaned up until the end of October, processed in November, and then published in December. So we're talking about May of 17's graduating class, May of 16, and May of 15. So looking at that number, you can see that we're headed in the right direction with all students. We have a lot of growth that we need to make in some other subcategories that we really have to improve on, but we are headed in the right direction. Our plan is 95%. That's our goal. That goal is not wavering. We are sticking with that everywhere we go. The team that I work with, we say we will get to 95%. We have a good plan in place how to figure out the root causes that we can help support our families and students and school districts to get to that point. But we are headed in the right direction. Where we started as a graduation team, we had to define the work. We had to define all the terms. We could have common language to speak throughout the entire agency. Also keeping your vision in mind as we did that so we didn't cross over anything. The next thing we did, we created goals with measurable outcomes. We meet as a team every other week, and then in between those weeks, individual teams meet and have accountability systems set up so that they can say, yes, we're making this progress weekly. And then I come in every other week and say, where are we at as a team? Everybody collaborates and we move from there. From there, we created a work group with cross-agency skills and experiences. So we have IT, fiscal, child nutrition and wellness. Everybody's on our team. It's not just a bunch of educators like myself sitting in a room theorizing stuff. We have actual practical thing going on. So good teamwork going on. Next, we had to come back to this. And this seems simple in the beginning when we started working with this, but there's a lot here. And I realized there was a lot here when I went home and I had a conversation with my wife about, honey, how are we going to help our baby understand his cognitive skills as a couple? And she said, what are cognitive skills? And I said, great question. And then I thought that we got to go back to the agency and say, how are we going to explain cognitive skills, not only to our schools and our kids, but also to those families that are supporting our schools and kids? So we have to break down what each of these things mean, make them very understandable so everybody can have a conversation around this. We can build the skills so kids can be employed, right? We always talk about these individual plan of studies. These are great tools, but if we're not developing the skills and understanding of how to develop that, they're never going to get there. We want kids to be able to go from job to job because they have great skill sets, not because they've been trained in one area. So that's what we're doing with cognition and employability skills, breaking that down, and then we're going to educate parents and families about what those things mean. Where we are now, these are the big 3 goals that graduation is working on to support your guys' vision and mission. We are creating a parent tips and guidelines document from childhood, so birth to 5, K to 2, 3 to 5, 6 to 8, and 9 through 12. Breaking down what academic means, cognitive means, technical employability, and civic engagement. Each of those things, we have skills that we hope to see each student be able to develop at each of those grade levels. And then we also have tips on how the parents can help them achieve those skills at home. So far, we have early childhood pretty much completed. We have the skills and the tips completed for the other grade bands. We're just working on how it's gonna look so that when it goes out, it actually has the same formatting. It's clearly understood. It's not something that's overwhelming. We made sure that the grade level, like the reading ability, is at a middle school level so that every family can understand and comprehend what's going on. It's not some really high college level education document that only people who live in this world understand. We made sure that most people can read it and understand it. From there, we are creating an internal professional development plan around this document. We have so many roadshows and trainings and professional development already going on. We don't need to create our own. Let's just attach this awesome opportunity for our parents and families to understand and say, the people that are already going out, take this information with you, sell it, promote it. Questions can come back to us and we'll answer those questions. But we don't need to have another opportunity to take parents or take teachers and people out of the classroom. They're already busy enough. We'll just attach this to the things we have going on in the agency. Child Nutrition and Wellness is going to do this. We'll have our CSAS team, obviously, they'll go out. We have all of our science, math, English, they'll go out and talk about this, et cetera. We're going to create that professional development, hopefully have that going in the spring of, is it 18 now? 19, so spring of 19. And then team 3 is our root cause and prevention. We're actually going to talk about that here in a little bit. When you think about root causes, you're thinking about poverty, you're thinking about chronic absenteeism, and you're thinking about things that we can control and the things that we can kind of sway, that we can just kind of influence a little bit, because those are 2 different things that we have to consider. Here's some more data, everybody's favorite thing. Those are the students that have dropped out. This is an annual amount. So when you think about the 4-year cohort, that's 4 years, right? That's 4 years total. This is just annual. So in 2015, in the state of Kansas, 3,578 students dropped out. Of those, 2,733 lived in poverty at the time. So let's go on to 16. 3,750 dropped out. Of that, 2,970 of those students lived in poverty. 2017, 3,608 students dropped out. Of that, 2,846 lived in poverty. We have a poverty issue. In the country, we are the second worst state at graduating our students in poverty. Only California is worse than us. So that's just something to chew on.
We have a list, so let's start with Jim.
Okay.
Are you ready for this?
Yeah.
Our goal is 95%. We're at 86 right now?
Close to 87, yeah.
Oh, close to 87.
Close to 87.
Okay. We've gotten the easy ones. We might have a few left. There's 728 or something that were not in poverty. You know, they've got different challenges than others. But I wasn't ready to start going there, Mr. Porter. But we've got the easy ones. Okay, there's still some easy ones. The road's going to be very difficult because when you say, well, they're in poverty, what does that mean? And we say here that the student is more important than the system. Okay, and if you're going to change, you know, the graduation rate past 90 in some of these school districts, and I won't go through the litany of those that do need the greatest help, because there's other districts that are already at 95. Okay, it'd be nice if we knew how many were that met our goal already and didn't meet our goal, rather than the holistic, and let's get down to, because it's going to be about individual schools and individual kids that are going to change the graduation rate. Okay, it's going to be about early childhood. So these kids, we have a better chance when they're here 12 years later. Okay, 12, 13 years later. It's going to be about IPS when they start studying those things. When they in the 7th and 8th grade and start going through and the courses make a difference. But when a kid gets kicked out of the house a junior year, or when drugs are involved, or when issues of I'm homeless today, you know, are going to be have to attacked on a different level. Right now, and I'll be real frank, okay, and this is not a criticism, but just an evaluation, you're dealing with the easy stuff. You're giving us easy stuff. You know, I'm looking for hard stuff. What are we doing that's going to change the culture in our schools that we have to individualize, not only in preschool and pre-K, but in senior year? Okay, what policies do we have that are in the way of us helping kids in the junior and senior year? You know, and I can give you tons of examples, so I'm not going to do that today, but I'm just going to say, what are we going to do? Sometimes it's finding them a home for the night. Sometimes it's giving them the structure, you know, within the school curriculum that they can go back and retrieve credits or whatever. But it's all individualized when we get here. So I appreciate what you're doing. And I don't mean to be critical of you know, you've got a team in the State Department, but as a principal sitting in a school out there, a high school principal, I'm facing the kids on an individual basis, and I better be. And I haven't seen individual basis stuff here. I mean, you're giving me the easy stuff. Now, the board members might not see that, but as a high school principal for 29 years, I just have to say that. Okay? I want to see us doing something that just changing the system. Right now, you're just telling me, you know, maybe there's more to come in the program, and I'm jumping ahead. And I don't mean, you guys are, I want to encourage you, but I'm just telling you this is get to 90 in some of these districts, it's going to be, and one of my best friends is a principal at West High, okay, in Wichita, which has, I think, the lowest graduation rate, and they're doing stuff that is amazing, you know, and they're digging in, and it's a fight every day to get that kid across the stage. And then we tell them later on, by the way, we're going to check them 2 years later to see if they worked out, and I'm just trying to get them across the stage. you know, because we know it's more than crossing the stage now. Graduation is about being prepared further. But my point is, I'd like to see a different report at a different time that's going to be more about how we're changing the system and getting into that last percentage of kids that are going to help us reach our goal, because those are going to be really hard. Okay? Really hard.
Couldn't agree with you anymore.
Okay? Good. That's a first step.
Janet?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have two questions or comments. On the parents' tips and guidelines, I would like to have a copy of that when you've gotten it, because I think this would help us as we go out into our communities to discuss this with parents and even staff members. So I would appreciate that. But this really resounded with me when you said we're the second worst state in the nation in graduating our students in poverty. A lot of those are my kids. And I'm very concerned. I know these districts where they're challenged, and these, as Jim says, they're doing a phenomenal job trying to work with them. So I think we need to really concentrate on this and see what are these other states doing that are, in fact, doing a better job with their students in poverty, because there's no doubt that is a challenge, but obviously I'm surprised we're this bad, but I would really like a concentrated effort in this area. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sally?
I think I started this whole mess, and I guess my first question to you is, are you comfortable with these statistics on that they're pretty accurate?
All data is only as good as the people that enter them, if that
Yes, that
correlates.
kind of answers it. Okay. Then I'm jumping down to your chronic absentee that you've had up here too. Did we get more kindergartners in 2017 than 16?
It went down slightly.
It went down, but yet our absenteeism went up.
Yes, ma'am.
Ooh, I don't like that. Okay. The other question I have is, do we track our dropouts?
Yes, ma'am.
So you know a dropout after 2 years after they've dropped out, you know whether they've gone back into the system or not, or?
So if they try to re-enter our system, they have an SSID that's attached to them. So I know that, sorry.
That's
But
okay.
As they come back in, if they actually do that before September of the next year, they don't come up in this data. Does that, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but I'm thinking that where I'm at, we have seen kids drop out because the dairies, and they pay pretty good money. And if you're in poverty and trying to help your family, sometimes they drop out. But yet we see them come back in either through an alternative way of some type. And so do we ever see if any of these kids come back in? And I think that's an encouragement if they come back in, because at least we're getting across the importance of education.
So at the state level, we don't track whether or not they come back in and then they are successful on an individual level, but we do have their individual identification number. And so if they come back in, they can still be part of the 4-year and 5-year cohort graduation data. Like, they can still be a plus for the school if they figure it out. Now,
So
once
the
they
fallacy in some of this, it still, to me, the fallacy in our graduation rate is still those 4- and 5-year cohorts. Because kids may take 6 years and graduate, but they don't get counted then.
That is correct. Yes.
Yeah.
They can still count as a graduate. Like, so we're also, the team that I work with, we are also over virtual schools and alternative schools as well. So we work with them directly, and we have conversations about how the good work they do is very important. It might not be directly reflected in the 4-year cohort data that we always examine, but it's still important stuff, and we don't want them to stop doing what they're doing. But it is a federal guideline that we have to follow the 4-year cohort as, so we have a 50-state understanding of what everybody's being compared to. If you recall, before 2011, Some states said they had 88% graduation rate. We put
Yes.
this in, they fell to 80. It was like, okay, there we go.
My thing is, when we get into this redesign that we're getting into, and we're looking at each student and their success, sometimes those federal guidelines screw up your, I don't know how else to say it, screw up your true statistics. And I think it's something that down the road, not right now, because I don't think we have enough schools in it, but as they get into this redesign and try to meet the students' needs where the students are at, that federal dropout rate is going to be ugly. So that's just my opinion on that.
Now, looking at the 2017, those 3,608 students, also based on the federal guidelines, if any of those students go get a GED, that is never counted.
If they went to go get a GED, they are one of the 3,608. They have to drop out right now in the state of Kansas to pursue their GED.
But if they get it, it still never counts. It never shows up in that data.
That goes over to KBOR. That's their data.
So do we know, or is there a way to know how many of those, if any, got a GED and moved on to something productive? You can do that. I mean, I know the federal guidelines say that we can't ever count that student as a graduate if they got a GED, but some of those people are in fact productive citizens because they got their GED.
So a little nuance there. We can actually.
Is there any way to track that?
Actually, we can, if we choose to, as a state, along with KBOR's cooperation, we can actually start tracking our GED graduates as successful graduates. We have to go down that route, though. We already have our application into KBOR for all of that data. Kathy and I, the IT director, we actually have a scheduled meeting with them to get all of that data. Then we're going to bounce it off to NSC data, and we're going to just do some internal playing around to see what that data says. And then we have to figure out if that's a route you as the board, Dr. Watson, and the rest of our team want to go down, but we have already started that application process.
Okay. Yes.
Brandon, you may want to expand a little bit. It sounds really attractive to go start counting the GED because some of those kids are successful. But there's a really strong internal argument when you look at that data. And just give a broad overview of future success of GEDs versus dropouts versus, you know, when I'm talking about it's an interesting, when you look at the long-term success.
It's very, very rare and very, very low that our students that actually drop out to pursue their GED earn it first and foremost, because it's one of the hardest tests you could possibly take. They have made this test very, very hard. Every single time I meet with them, like, yeah, they even stepped it up now. It's even higher than it used to be. On top of that, many of our students believe that when they drop out to take the GED, their families and parents believe that they can just go take the test, and that's not how it works. They actually have to enroll in classes, and they have to show up to class, and they have to be taught how to take the GED for each of these individual areas, and they just stop coming. So I'm not saying there isn't any value in at least finding out more information about this data, but I'm just saying, if we're thinking we're going to get a huge jump in percentage by adding this population in, that would be false. I don't believe that the data would speak true to that. I think we would be lucky to get 3%. We would be lucky to get 3%.
I would assume the number would be very low. I just like to know what it is.
Yes, yeah, and we're on the process of doing that. It's been in the works for about 5 months, and hopefully we can get a meeting with them to get it going.
Ken?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The data is what it is, and we look very bad on the graduation rate, as you pointed out, based on the same flawed data that everybody else is using. So I don't think tinkering with the data is going to help us. But what really, I don't know what is in place or what plans there are, but these kids that are labeled here as being in poverty, are they treated, are they approached, or are they helped in any way differently from another kid in the school? Because that's what needs to happen. I mean, we have kids who drop out of school because the politics of the school are such that they can't make it. They can go someplace else where they're met where they are and are accepted for the gifts that they have and encouraged there, even if it's sports, okay? And keep the kid in school. So it's all over the board, and I don't think we have any, I would like to know if we have a system in place to address the individual needs of these kids. Because just saying that, I mean, the data says that poverty is a big issue. It certainly is, but that's neither here nor there as far as I'm concerned. Does Joe have an opportunity to is he encouraged, and his parents encouraged and brought along to ensure that he graduates, as opposed to just letting him go for some reason that is not acceptable? And I know they don't understand this GED these GED requirements, but I don't think a lot of kids. I could be wrong. I often am. That I don't think a lot of kids drop out just to take the GED. There may be some who do, but it shouldn't be too difficult to discourage that if that's what a kid is talking about. They talk about things that don't make any sense sometimes to us, but there are things in the back behind them that are pushing them to do that. That's what we need to be addressing, I think. So I don't know if I said anything that made sense, but I just am uncomfortable with the fact that a kid leaves high school, because I don't know what we've done to prevent it. Sure. Sometimes I think I know for a fact that some schools are actually rather glad when a kid drops out. Okay, and we need to be better than that. We have to raise our game above that.
Yes, sir. And I think if you look at Team 3, root cause and prevention, and that
we haven't given you a chance to talk about that. So maybe you have this all figured out.
Yeah,
completely understand. That's really is like Mr. McNeese talked about. That is exactly what we're focused on. We have to get into more of the details.
Yeah.
I didn't think that this was a good time or place to get into that full depth because, as you know, as a principal for 29 years, there's so much nuance that goes into that. One of those topics could take us a whole day just to talk about.
Okay. That's where I'd like to go.
I hope we get there too. I really would like to. Everything we talk about, the root cause and prevention, is the things that both of you have spoken about, and even over here on this side, that is our entire focus with that team is what are we going to do to actually make a difference so that, like myself, someone who comes from poverty, it didn't take football. It took football to save me as a sophomore in high school. That's not okay. I should have loved school from the time I walked in there until the time I left.
But you didn't. So football kept you in.
It did, yes,
Okay.
sir. Yes, sir.
Which is a good thing.
Yeah. It is a good thing, but I wish I would have had the skills.
So
right?
if we've made mistakes down the road, we need to put them in the past and do something to keep the kid there.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
In my view.
And sometimes
Absolutely.
that's football, and sometimes that's something else. Now,
That's right.
we're going to have one more question, and then I'll tell my college boy, wait, we're going to actually, after one more question, going to let you finish.
Okay.
Or at least move on for a while.
I'll do
Janet.
my best.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to agree with Ken, believe it or not. See, we can agree, Ken. I agree. There's so many challenges with these kids. I mean, they're poverty, and that creates all kinds of problems for them, and I want us to really concentrate on that. But I guess the one thing we've talked, about how we're the second worst in the state on graduating and stuff, but I would like to know where we rank. I guess I want to bring us back up a little bit so we're not so bad, because it was my understanding, was it the Taylor Report? Is that what it was called? That went to the Supreme Court? That not one state in the nation was achieving 95%. Is that correct? So we have lofty goals, which I absolutely support, and I'm 100% behind them. But I would like to at least I think we need to know exactly where we stand nationally as far as our total graduation rates are at this current time. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. We are in the teens as all students. So we are in, I can't exactly remember the number. It's been a little while since I looked at it. Dr. Watson or Brad might know, but I believe we were 15 or 16 as all students graduating percentile wise. So let's not convolute things here. We're saying that of the students that don't graduate, 80% of them come from poverty in the state of Kansas. We are the second worst with that group. So as far as all students graduating, we're 15th or 16th, somewhere in that area in the country. We're good. I mean,
We're not. We want to be
we want to be better, right? But we're not second worst either. So like convoluting those things is something that we need to make sure we kind of tease that out. We just got to do a much better, more intentional job with each student to help them, not let poverty be the reason why they can't be successful. When we look at chronic absenteeism data, I really want to hit on this. This is kind of my, I feel like this is something I know a little bit about. There is a direct correlation between attendance in early childhood and kindergarten and the dropout rate in the high school level. Direct. We, as a state agency supporting districts, supporting schools, supporting teachers, supporting families, have to do a better job of educating our families from the moment they have a child to the time they walk in our building about the importance of being there every single day. We have to help our families understand that their want to help their kids be in class is essential to success down the road. They are directly correlated. So that's why I highlight the kindergarten numbers. It doesn't seem like a lot when you look at 64,000 versus 4,000, but those 4,000 kids more than likely are going to stay in this data. That's why we have to make that number very, very low. Because there are moments that happen later in life where a kid gets kicked out of their house and then they become an issue with attendance, right? It didn't start early. Those are the exceptions, not the rules. The rules say a student who already shows up with bad attendance in kindergarten will continue that process all the way through their educational experience. So we've got to do a better job of educating everybody in the system about that.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
may I ask a quick question? Describe for me chronic absenteeism.
Yeah, so chronic absenteeism is if you miss 10% or more of your school year at any given time.
Okay.
So if you miss 2 days in the first 2 weeks, you are chronically absent. And there should have already been a conversation had between that student, that family, the student, and someone in that building. That's what we sent out. That's what we're training our districts on, is that chronic absenteeism starts day one.
Okay.
Ken, I think also as we get into this, and it's one of the things we're exploring, if you'll jump back, Brandon, there's a strong tie also between that chronic absenteeism and the poverty. So it's not also, it's, as Brandon said, a conversation about the importance. It's also a community conversation about, well, maybe they don't have a car that even runs reliably to get the kid there, and it's too far to walk, and you talked about transportation funding, but you see how this becomes linked. Because if we're going to make to 95%, we've got to go after this number in big amounts. I mean, you just basically have to cut it in half. And that's a really tough thing to do because it's a community look at how you're going to address the factors for why kids don't arrive at school. And there's some great poverty simulations going on, in the nation across the state that try to talk about, parents that are in turmoil, right? I mean, they've got 2 jobs, or they're on drugs, or they don't have reliable transportation, or, the hours don't line up, and there's all these reasons. This as we get into it, is the critical work that Brandon and all the team and the people out in the field are going to have to do to move toward 95%.
And even then, those students won't show up in our data until 12 years later. So it's just something that we have to keep in mind that's how this affects. It is a 12-year cycle starting then. And it even starts before then. Birth to 5 is the most important foundation piece. So let's talk about where we are going. We do have lofty goals, but those goals are definitely all that we can influence and control to a certain degree and hopefully get there. Think about 95%. That's our goal. And in order to do that, we have to take on the Kansas State Board of Education's vision to the families. That's our parent tips and guidelines. We're taking that out to our parents. We don't just want our schools to talk about it. We want our parents to be engaged. When they walk into that school, they can have those conversations. Then we have to build the capacity within our own agency to spread that vision. It's not just going to be on the team of 15 people that work on this initiative within graduation. It's all of our responsibility to do that. And then on top of that, we have to talk about the things that we can control and influence when it comes to poverty, and talk about the things that we can control and influence when it comes to chronic absenteeism. Many times, because, you know, I just came from a school that had high poverty rates before I started working here, so many of our principals and teachers would say, but we can't control that. But we can influence it. We can be a positive influence in the process of making this better. Don't worry about what you can't control, worry about what you can influence. So that's a very important way to change our mindset. How can we influence things to make them better? That's all I have as far as presentation goes. There might be more questions and answers or questions and comments you might have, so.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your enthusiasm, and I like the influence part of this. I was getting ready to take a break, but it looks like we have questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You have a graphic that has African Americans and Asians. And I would just about bet the farm that we could change the identifiers in the leftmost column, Asian, Hispanic, multiracial, to economic strata and have pretty close to the same data. I would just about bet on that. That if we focused on poverty instead of race, we could influence some very positive outcomes. And that's one of my talking points. We should stop labeling kids by race. It's a big lift. It's a huge lift. Politically, it's enormous. But I want my fellow board members to think about this. And I've mentioned it before, and I'm going to keep mentioning it. Because I think Kansas is in a unique position to actually take a bite out of racism. And our children really don't give a hang what color kids are. Birds of a feather flock together. I get it. You go to a school cafeteria, you'll see black kids sitting together, Hispanic kids sitting together. It's human nature. I get it. I do. But if we're going to put the focus on individual children, then we do a disservice by actually saying that race matters. The difficulty is there are a lot of people who do say that, and some of them are well-intentioned. Black Lives Matter. Fine. But I have to share with you, Brandon, that I was watching a PBS NewsHour that I haven't seen for a while. And there was Judy Woodruff with a special on Race Matters. This is huge graphic across the screen. Race Matters. And I had to take issue with that, and I had to talk to my wife about that. When I'm driving a school bus and a kid gets on my school bus, race should not matter. And when I'm running a classroom to teach mathematics, the language I love, race should not matter at all. So I think what we should do is stand up for principle and what's right and focus on socioeconomics and go the extra mile so we can have smaller classes in lower socioeconomic areas. I don't know the magic formula for that. I don't know that there is one. But that's how I would help influence getting the board's vision to reality so that we can live by those 8 words on the wall.
Sally.
Thank you. I want to go back to something that was talked about yesterday when Janet gave her report on opium and the drugs. And one thought at the board table was that maybe we need to include that into our configuration of poverty, those things that influence students on difficulty in educating. Can't think of the right name. Risk factors. Thank you, Brad. On our risk factors. And I guess what I'd like to know is have a little opinion on whether you think we should be adding something like that to our risk factors, because it's becoming quite a problem in the state of Kansas, so.
Sure. As I say this, I don't want you to think that I'm diminishing what you said, because I 100% agree with you.
I want an
When you
opinion.
think about risk factors, they have to be things that you can track, right? So like you can track someone's income level because they have to report those things. We have reports that come in. You can track whether or not English language is, whether English is their first language or not, you can track that. When you think about special education indicators and whether or not they have a learning disability or do not, right? You can track all of those things. The issue with trying to make that leap, while it's a very important one, is people don't openly come out and say, yes, I'm a drug user and I have a child, so how could we possibly track that? I'm not saying it would be impossible. We could probably do something with the Department of Health Administration and say, you know, how many people are checking themselves in for drug rehabilitation, or how many are you saving in your community? And then we can have that kind of information go out to our school districts to say, you need to be aware that in your community, this amount of people are being impacted by drug usage and overdoses, et cetera. But as far as including that in our risk factors, I think it would be pretty hard to get someone to show up and say, yes, I'm a drug user, and then we can track that. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm not trying
Yes,
to diminish.
well,
what you're
you
saying,
gave me
just-
a wonderful answer, because I didn't know that we need to be able to track that. So that really helps. We might be able to do something about regional, because we can do that. But as individuals, thank you. That helps very much to know about tracking.
Thank you very much, and the board will reconvene at 10:15.
Those reports that come out.
Are you next, Beth?
I am. But Brandon's already got y'all warmed up for looking at data. That's a good thing. So I'm here today to wait for a couple seconds. Or do you want me just to start?
Just go ahead and start.
Just go ahead and start.
And we'll embarrass them as they come in.
Okay. Yeah.
I'll save your seat.
Okay.
So I'm here today to talk to you about post-secondary success. So, and I know the commissioner shared a little bit of the information with you yesterday in his opening remarks. So some of this will just kind of be a recap and a repeat from what we talked about, what you talked about before. So Brandon and Stacy both did a nice job of kind of revisiting with you the vision that you had and how you arrived at the goals that were established. I just want to talk to you a little bit and revisit the conversation about how we arrived at our post-secondary success goal, or how you arrived at your goal that we're helping you implement. So we, most all of the research for this area was based on the Georgetown study from the Center on Education and the Workforce. So what we know is that going forward, and if you start at the bottom, that we know that of the jobs in Kansas, there will only 29% of those jobs will need a high school diploma. All the other work in the state is going to require another piece of credential, right? So whether that's an associate degree or a certificate, a bachelor's degree, or master's or PhD. But that's the breakdown, and that's what we work with. So that's kind of where the numbers start and what we talk about, okay? So it's important for you then to look at these three things, because they're extremely important to grasp. The first one I talked about just briefly. Post-secondary success is the high school diploma plus one other credential, right? Could be a certificate from a technical college. It could be an associate's degree. It could be a bachelor's degree. But kids need to do more than just graduate from high school. The second one is that this represents a totally new way of thinking and requires each data to go in and look at their data to get a better understanding of what's happening with the students once they graduate. And the third one, and I can't stress this enough, so once we put all this data out on the website, everyone wants to go and look at how great they're doing or not doing and compare to each other. It's like you've been saying, this is about the individual kids and the success of each student. This data that we put together isn't about ranking everyone in some type of order. We all have the same goal we're working towards. Some are further away from the goal than others, and we should be helping them. But please don't get hung up on ranking schools when you look at this data, because that's just critical. That's not the intent of why we're doing this. So here we are. This is our process that we begin to track for post-secondary success. So in your handout and on my screen, it's the orange circle. I don't know what color you call the circle up there, but it says KSDE loads the individual data into AMOS. That's where we are today, okay? We got data from NSC early in the summer, about the time school was out, and we've gone through a process here at the agency to match that data with the graduation cohort and load it into AMOS for everyone to look at their data, okay? So if you start at the top, that's what Brandon talked about. The school districts send us their graduation data. That gets finalized at the end of October. So we're still looking at, for the purposes of this year, we're looking at the 2016 graduates, right? Because we're looking 2 years out when this cycle's complete. So the districts send us their data. We send that cohort data to NSC. They do some matches for it. It comes back to us. We process it and then put it into AMOS. And we get that data from NSC about 3 times a year. So we only update it on the public website once a year. We only recalculate the success rate once a year. We only calculate the effective rate once a year. But we will start tracking in November when we send the graduates for the next year's graduates, the 2018 graduates that we'll send to NSC in November or December. We'll start getting data back on that. But remember, we're looking at 2 years out. So we have quite a lag time if you think about the conversation today, from the chronic absenteeism that we're starting to work with in early childhood and kindergarten to when we get 2 years after graduation to finally have this success rate calculated. So you've all seen this. This is the data that comes from NSC. And so every district can go in on our website through our authenticated application and look at this data. What you need to know about this chart, and remember, is that this follows one graduating class for multiple years. So if you look on the far right, at that point, we probably have kids with master's degrees, right? If you're starting with the first year out, that's the first year that we're expecting them to do something after they graduate from high school. The second year is what we measure. Third year, fourth year, we get our bachelor's degrees, fifth and sixth year. So they can track their kids all the way through in the NSC data. It's a very, very good program for them to use, and I'm going to show you how we're recommending they use this data in a little bit. The second thing we do, and this is the chart that I think that you saw yesterday. This is the newest one, hot off the press, with our changes. This is the one where we dropped off the 2011 data and added the 2016 data. We did the 5-year average, that's on the right. So you can see we have our graduation rate. Now remember, if you go back and look at Brandon's data, this is the 2016 data, so you can flip back in his PowerPoint and see that. The success rate, 5-year average again. So each one of the years is calculated there. Now, if you're like me, and you wanted to go back and say, well, what did that look like with the one that's posted out on the website right now? You'll see a little bit of change in the numbers because we're getting better at our longitudinal data set, right? So one of the things we know that a year ago when this chart was put together, we had several higher ed institutions, whether that was private, 4-year institutions, or technical schools that weren't reporting. And there's some good examples of how we've had people actually make a difference, talk to the school districts, talk to the technical schools or the community colleges and get the data reported. So what we've said is that we can go back and this data So in the case of Dodge City, when they decided to report, this data gets readjusted with the reporting of that data all the way back for however many years they want to send it, right? So if they send 5 years of data, we're going to go back and add to this chart. Well, then once a year, which is what we've just gone through this past month, this data then gets updated. So if we had some institutions like Baker or Dodge City Community College that they decided to report, then these numbers will change a little bit. The other thing that happens with any new database is that we did this last year. We were very interested in it a year ago. It was exciting new data. Well, as we worked with the data over the year, we found out some of the business rules had to be tweaked a little bit. So we had to go through a process of retweaking the business rules, making sure everyone was getting counted correctly, just like we do with the assessment results. And I've talked to you about that quite a bit. So I think you can understand the connection between wanting to get the data right. And so we took some time this year before this became available. And we were happy that we could have it for you for this board meeting, that you can see what the success and the effective rate is. So what do we do with this data? This is what we're calling, as far as the post-secondary work group is concerned, our diagnostic approach to helping people use all the data you've looked at. So we've spent the first year at the very bottom step, right? We've been out to, we've had over 20 places that we visited as a post-secondary team. Some of that's been the Keene Conference, the Impact Institutes. We had a roadshow similar to what Stacy does with the IPS, where we were out in different districts, really taking the time to go out and explain to everyone. We reached, on those 20 roadshows, we figured we've reached half the districts, which is pretty good for our first year. And so half the districts, how to use the data, how to look at that chart with all the purple and green on it, and then how to look at and explain to them how the success rate's calculated. So that's been year one. Year two is when we start, and that's what we're starting to do right now with the Impact Institutes this summer, is really talk about the systematic approach to go in and investigate your data. What does it tell us? What do you need to focus on? And actually coming up with a plan. So that's the approach that the team that I'm working with is taking to really help people get into the data and understand it and to make a difference. So this just kind of repeats. I'm not going to read all this to you, but when we go out and provide technical assistance, we work through a series of questions with them with their NSC data. Do they understand how to read the report? Do they know where it's coming from? Can they figure out, can they drill down to the individual student? You can drill down to the individual student with this data and find out were they successful and how they were counted in the data. So that's a really important piece that we've come a long way in just the year that we've been working on this. And then the progress report that we work on. And this is really where we're starting to focus. So after they really understand the data, which is where we've been the last year, then we ask them, is this reflective of the efforts that we think we're doing in our school, right? We have a whole series of questions that we work through in the workshop that we'll go out and provide. We can come for 60 to 90 minutes, or we can do all day. We're pretty flexible on how much people want to get in this data and what they want to do. We've also worked with the service centers, and they're equipped to help walk people through this process too. And in the end, it's really about how you're changing your system, the school improvement that you're doing to reach each child so that they can be successful.
You have a question from Ann? Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so this is my last slide. And so this is this is my summary piece of how this brings everything, I think, full circle. This is the model. Everyone likes to have a visual. So, we don't want our team to be left out either. We have our visual, we have our model, it's kind of one of the things we do. So you can look at this diagram from a lot of different ways. But what I'd encourage you to do is to, instead of reading from left to right, to start on the right, okay? Because that's where we are. That's our data. That's what we have. The post-secondary success data, the NSC report, and how to use all of that. And then when you look at it, will take people back. This is all research-based. So in the middle, you'll see that first are our 4 keys to college and career readiness. That comes from Dave Conley. He presented at the annual conference last year. He was one of our keynote speakers. He talks about think, know, act, and go. So we can walk through that process when we're out working with the districts on how to really look at that. The middle piece is where we are then when you're back looking at your data. You've got all your individual kids. And you can look at their aspirations, expectations, and then follow it through to their college enrollment, right? So it's kind of like the story that Brad likes to share with everyone when he talks about he went to a back-to-school night. A lot of parents in the room, and they said, you know, all the fresh, you know, how many of you think your kids will go on to college? And they all raise their hand, right? And then he shares the data about how many of them won't, how many won't graduate, how many won't go on and be successful. It goes back to really what started this whole process and that conversation when we've been out in the field talking to people. This is that work. How do you not lose people? How do you change from the aspirations when kids start high school to the enrollment when they get to be freshmen in college? I mean, we would like to see that line be more horizontal instead of dropping, right? That's what it's all about, is how you do that. That data research all comes from the AIR, American Institute of Research, and so it's another research base that we go out and we provide people with materials and professional developments and ideas on how they can close that gap between aspiration and enrollment. And then if you go to the left, the forgotten middle, and you'll notice that that goes down to middle school. That comes from some ACT research. A lot of people have done the research, but there's a lot of research from Explore and now Aspire, where they talk about kids in middle school and they get forgotten. It is so important. We know from the research that kids in middle school need to stay engaged. So when I look at assessment data, it's alarming to me to see the drop in assessment scores from elementary to middle school. We know that if we can keep students engaged and they keep learning and they keep growing and they keep making progress, then their aspirations, expectations, and the enrollment will be closer together. So we can put all this together in a presentation that we take out and work with the districts. And together, that's the college and career readiness is a process, not a specific point in time. And then at the bottom, you'll notice that what pulls all of this together is the individual plan of study. So the earlier the students start their individual plan of study, the more focus you have on the forgotten middle, the more likely the aspirations and enrollment will match, and you'll have post-secondary success. So this is our diagnostic, that's our model. And really want to get into the weeds on all the data today about how we do it, but it's what we do with the data that we think is the important work with the post-secondary success work group. So, questions? I really thought you guys would ask so many questions of Stacy and Brandon. I thought I would have about 20 minutes.
You have several,
okay.
But I'm going to start.
Okay.
This is going to sound like a broken record, and it's going to sound picky. But I wish the term college and career readiness would be banned from our vocabulary.
Okay.
And the reason is we have traditionally, whether we meant to or not, we have traditionally valued getting ready to go to college more than we have other things. We've done that for decades. We've done that when I was in school back whenever, and by the way, they had public schools when I was young. I'm old, but not that old. Because we are, and that's why we have used the term post-secondary success. Because I believe by saying college and career ready, just by virtue of the fact that the word college comes first, we're still communicating that that's more important. And that's not, I believe, the vision of this board. The vision of this board is that every job, every career path is valued, and whether or not you're going to be the MD or whether or not you're going to be the plumber, if that is your passion, if that is your interest, if that is something that's important. So, and I've had I've been in discussions, I've had opportunities this year to go to several conferences in other states where I've said that over and over again, and I believe we're sending the wrong message. I believe that we made the correct decision when we used post-secondary success as opposed to college and career ready, and I really would like for that to be just banned from our vocabulary everywhere, and that may just be me, and I understand that, but I believe it sends the wrong, when we use that term as opposed to post-secondary success or post-secondary achievement, then we are in fact still delivering unwittingly the same message that college is more important than other things, and in our view, and part of our vision is that's not the case. That's just me ranting, and I'll get off my horse now. And Ann was the next person in line.
Thank you. I think I probably get more questions about this than anything when I go visit superintendents and boards and administrators. And even when I talk to people from tech colleges, they're not sure about this. So I've got a few questions. One is, when is the individual school data for 2016 going to be loaded on their reports, their building report cards?
We're hopeful today, tomorrow.
Today? Okay.
This week for sure.
And you mentioned Baker and Dodge City. Are they still not in? I thought they were in.
They are.
They are?
So,
Oh, okay.
and I will just tell you an anecdote about the one that's not reporting right now. We thought was reporting until we got our data and was actually to look at it. We were out there. We were doing a conversation. I mean, part of what we look at when we work with the districts, and in this case it was a service center, said, look at your data and where are the 3 top institutions that students attend, and then drill down. And so it became obvious that there was an institution missing, right? And a lot of conversation, and the superintendent actually makes a phone call at the time to the higher ed, and we really thought that it was all taken care of and they were going to report, and we found out that they hadn't done it. So we're following up with another phone call. I feel certain that they'll be reporting very soon.
So what kinds of things can a school district backload send to us that we would add that we might not have any other way?
Well, they can't.
I thought you guys said they could send you information like somebody went in the military or something and you would.
No, we don't. That's not in the success calculation chart that you look at. The school districts, it's only the data that we have available. It's like Brandon explained, that it's what we can collect, and we don't have any way of collecting military data right now. So.
Oh, I thought I
So
heard
we
you say the
add-
schools provided you information and you put it in. That, I must have missed.
They can drill down and look at their own and recalculate, but right now it's only the data that we have in our database that we're using.
Okay. Well, the one that they seem to have the most questions about, and I do too, and I know this sounds like a broken record, like, gosh, is she dumb? She's still not getting it, but maybe I'm just not getting it. But what counts when a student goes to technical school? For example, if they get a CNA, they do 6 weeks and get a CNA, is that counted as a success?
So what we know is that the expectations for the labor market, and we talk about this a lot, it's the high school diploma plus.
Right.
Now, it can be earned in conjunction with something, but we're looking for certificates that are earned through another institution. Right, so if they're going to Highland Community College to do that, and Highland Community, that would be continuing their work related, I don't know, post-secondary, after secondary.
But I'm saying it's
education is
something like a
completed.
CNA counted, because we don't count that in, college and career ready stuff as high demand, high wage jobs. So it doesn't even count on our scale as a good job. Well, I know it's a good job, but you know what I mean? It's not high wage, high demand,
So
high
at
pay.
this point in time, we have 2 ways of adding to the data, right? So NSC, there's an ability for technical schools to report all of the certificates they issue, programs they complete. That can all be reported through NSC, and that's our goal. That's what we're moving toward. Today, currently, we collect data through the Career and Technical Education applications. It's currently called KPAC, and we're adding back the Senate Bill 155. Okay, so that's in the data today, so CNA is in this data as we speak.
Okay, so if I got a CNA and the tech college gave them a CNA certificate, the tech college would report that to the NSC?
They would report it in NSC, just like an associate's degree, just like a bachelor's degree, just like enrollment. I mean, it would be reported through the technical school. And we think to sustain this data with the credibility that it needs over time, that's the way we need to move toward tracking the data. It was a big effort the first year just to get all the institutions to report the kids that were showing up truly for higher education, college purposes, right? So now we will be embarking when the school year starts on getting all of the technical schools and any other four-year institutions that might be providing certificates.
Okay, so whether it's high wage, high demand, doesn't matter. If the tech college issues it and they report it to NSC, we count it as a success.
We would.
Okay,
we would.
So like, let's say, for example, I finished the automotive training, and Washburn Tech gave me an automotive tech certificate, which would be their document. That would count as a success. But what about the industry certifications, which is different? Because does that count too, or just what the tech college issues?
So the industry recognized certificate, the data largely comes from labor, right? And we don't have a way of matching the labor data to our data. I mean, if we did, we could go out and track everyone's employment, right? I mean, if we had the labor data available to us, it doesn't work that way. There's something very important in all this work that's called the Student Data Privacy Act. And we don't have social security numbers of any student in our data system, something that we stopped doing many years ago. And we have the student identification number, right? And so that's how we track everyone, is with that student identification number. So it's really hard to look at the labor data or to take the other data and match it to, and know that we're accurate in matching and being fair and equal to everyone.
No, I get that. That's fine. So those are issued by other groups, and so we can't track them. So all we're tracking is what the tech school, so if, a kid went to like down in Wichita, the 8-week sheet metal class, I'm not sure if they get a certificate or what they get at the end of that.
So the Career and Tech Ed team will be working to make sure that all those articulation agreements are in place. I mean, it's a big project to move everything to reporting in the NSC. We just think over the long term, because remember, go back to our goal, it's a high school diploma plus something else, right? And what we can track and what we've decided our measure would be is the data that's in the clearinghouse.
So maybe we need
to get all
to
the data in there.
Talking to our local tech colleges about what you're reporting. I assume you guys are doing this, right?
Well, we will be doing that. There'll be a letter coming out from the commissioner explaining the importance to the technical schools, explaining the importance to the superintendents to talk with the technical schools to make sure all of the articulation agreements are in place and the data gets reported. Right now, we're adding back the data we collect on the Senate Bill 155.
So Ann, I want to make sure, because you're in a nuance and you get these questions and it's important.
It is.
So let's take an AWS welding certificate, right? That's a nationally recognized. If that's done in high school, then we're collecting that currently through Senate Bill 155. If, however, the student graduated high school without it, didn't go to Washburn Tech, and went out and got that on their own some way, there would be no way from the Department of Labor that we have that. So
we are tracking some certificates if they got them while they were still in high school.
That's correct.
But not later.
So we've got two pieces of data that we're currently collecting. What schools upload to us from Senate Bill 155, we've done this, and what the higher ed institutions are reporting to us. As Beth said, we'd like to move all of that to the higher ed so that it's one source of data and it makes our data much more accurate than someone self-reporting.
Well, you know, we've talked too, though, about, see, this 155 list that changes every year, which isn't helpful to schools, because, gosh, I thought I was headed to this, and now it's not on the list anymore. But that list is supposed to be high wage, high demand
Correct.
jobs, not everything like a CNA. But we're counting CNA. I mean,
Or counting
I don't really-
industry recognized certifications, right, Beth?
well, industry recognized certifications aren't really what, it's like, my son went to Washburn Tech, he got an automotive tech certificate. There isn't any industry really that recognizes that. He has to go take a test to get the industry recognized certificate. But in today's world, what you're telling me is, as long as he got through Washburn, he walked across the stage and got their certificate, he'd be counted, right?
Yes.
I mean, it's just hard to be clear on what I can see why the schools are going, oh my God, I don't know.
That's why we really need to move toward the one data source. And remember, this has nothing to do, this is all about the accuracy of the data and
Yeah.
what we can tell people we've used to make the calculation based on that vision of having a high school diploma plus another type of credential, right? And so that's what we're moving toward. We think, you know, we'd like to think we could do that in the next year. Might take a little bit longer, but that's what we're working toward, because we think to sustain the data, to really look at trend data, to meet the goals we have over time, we need to make sure that things aren't coming on and off the list. I mean, that's a big concern from a data perspective for me. I mean, how can I look at that and say, well, in 2015, we counted this. In 2013, we didn't. I mean, Senate Bill 155 is fairly new. I mean, we could go back farther and find it not in there at all. So,
Well,
right?
not very, I mean, it's
Yeah.
pretty much back, it should be in all the years now. But the thing is, I mean, like I said, 155 doesn't count every certificate you might get.
it
Like
doesn't. It
CNA shouldn't be
It doesn't.
on there, but we're counting it, and I'm not sure if that's okay or
So
not
there
okay.
could be, I mean, I could come back to you next year and show you this data, and you'll see a little bit of change because we will correct that over time.
But I mean, should we correct it? I don't know. I mean, should we count, even though, should we be counting beyond 155 is what I'm saying? Are there other things? I mean, we're doing it now, evidently.
So the decision was made to use the clearinghouse data for students going on to higher education. And since we're saying you need something beyond high school that's earned, I get that you can have dual enrollment, I get that you can have programs while you're in high school, but the idea is that you do something else. The idea isn't that we graduate you at 18 and you're 100% finished, right? It's post-secondary. It's doing something afterwards to help sustain your career for the rest of your life, right? So it's...
You know, and I get that, and it's awesome. I think this is, you know, one of the best parts of our whole plan. I get a lot of questions when I go out and they go, what counts and what doesn't?
a lot of
And all I'm trying to do is get clarification on
So
what's
I
in
have,
there.
you know, I have a great team. I have, right now, it happens to just be guys that they can, you know, they're more than happy to either work on the phone with people or, you know, like I say, we've been out to 20 different places this past year. You know, I think the demand will be stepped up the next year. We will be more than happy to go out and work through the data. IT is working on making available a report that we can actually, at the state, look at individual students in an easier way. I mean, we do have that capability now. These guys can go, they do their research before they go out and work with a district. They can go in with specific students and let them know why the student counted or why they didn't, what they can do to, you know, to help. And then all the work that I showed you, that it's really about that diagnostic work and back mapping it. I mean, Brandon is going all the way back to early childhood, right? With the post-secondary work, we're kind of backing it down to middle school. The plan of study, working with the middle school kids, and getting them ready for what their success, what they want their success to be. It's kind of, that's our vision.
Okay. All right. We'll move on, Jim.
Thank you. Well, this morning's been quite a show. It is, it should go without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway, that we were not having these conversations 3.5 years ago. This is all pretty new stuff.
Very new.
It's moving fast, and whether it's graduation rate. Now, we always talked about graduation, but there's a whole lot more pressure, and it's a whole lot more important because of the Kansas Can Vision now, and IPS and post-secondary. In fact, I have to say, the two biggest challenges to my thinking about being on the board were, quite frankly, post-secondary success. I mentioned before 29 years as a principal. I will not say that again, but I will tell you it was really hard for me to accept post-secondary responsibility when I had spent most of my career just dragging these rascals across the stage, screaming and biting all the way, and they were the ones screaming and biting. They didn't want to do it. It was a real challenge. Now all of a sudden, my effectiveness as a leader in a building and community is to get these guys and gals a certificate. You're kidding me. You want me to do what? And who's going to track this? Then you have, in response, and I think follow up to Ann's remark, Senate Bill 155 came out and had a different purpose. It was a funding and incentive thing, came from the governor's office, great program. And then ours comes along and we're looking at certificates, and we're not looking at funding and counting different ways. They were going to be accountable for money. So that kind of a big difference, but it was another effort that was going on simultaneously, or actually before we even started this. Well, it was really hard for me to, for my career, to buy into the fact that post-secondary success numbers were my responsibility. And I think the field is still having troubles with that. I can't imagine, because, we're changing the way we think about the success of our schools, not to individual students, and to the fact that there's more to it than just walking across the stage. That has to have more value, more meaning as we go along. IPS is the same way. So those just huge changes, in terms of what we're doing. And my recommendation to the board and to the field is keep going. We're going to have lots of question marks and a couple of dead ends and maybe a cliff or two, but it does not mean that we're not on the right road. It's a little complicated because we're in new territory, and we're starting to be more specific about things. And as we do that, more specificity will be required. But we still have to remember, this is all about individual kids. The post-secondary rate is, schools should not be lined up and put in an order. It's about the individual students. And IPS, graduation and post-secondary measures are all part of our Kansas Can Vision, and we are in the beginning stages, not excusing that we're going to be smarter in 6 weeks than we are today, and we'll be way smarter in a year. And I say in about 5 or 6 years, we'll culturalize this, where it's going to be, we won't have to explain stuff. And Ann's right, we get a lot of questions on this. It took me a while to learn it. And I'm not dealing with the everyday activities and programs and leadership at schools. So, yeah, this is really great. This is, all three reports have been very good. It just reminded me, as I said, that, wow, I've really changed my thinking. And we're asking a lot of people across the state to change their thinking. And there's a lot of questions, but it doesn't mean we're on the wrong road. We're on the right road. So thank you.
Thank you. And Sally.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I know I've said it once and I'll say it again. You're an awesome leader because you agree with me.
Sometimes.
Sometimes. My first buzz in was because of the post-secondary. I feel like a dog on a bone chewing on that terminology, but we've got a culture to change, and we cannot get teachers, parents, everybody to change until we, as a group, start using the term post-secondary. And when you go out and you represent the state at different groups, and you say, oh, we don't use college and career ready anymore, we use post-secondary, they'll stop and they'll look at you for a little bit, and then they'll go, you know, that's great. And so I just encourage the department and everybody to start looking at their PowerPoints and look up there every time they see college and career ready and think, well, maybe that ought to be post-secondary on that. And so, because we discussed at this table for quite a while before we came up with that term to be actually listed as one of our 5 points. I'd like to jump in on, follow up also what Jim was saying on higher ed. What we're doing here with our effective rate, I'm not sure that the board members that are serving some of these higher ed institutions are getting it yet. And I think we're at the baby stages of some of this, but when you talk to community college boards and you say to them, you know, what you do at your community college is going to have a rate on your local school district, on their effective rate and on their accreditation. You are all part of this again, and it's all going back to that involving the community. And I think we're on the right. I think you've got a couple of more years of adjusting that data before we can just take it to heart. And the schools can feel like, yes, this is what we're doing. And I think we're going to have to tweak that a little more, but we always said this was a process, a living process. And so I commend you on where you are, and Ann's right. We go out and we ask a lot of questions and we get it wrong, and then we get it right, and then it's like, oh, I can't remember the answer to that one, I'm going to have to call again. But I think you guys are doing a great job on helping us get to our vision, and I appreciate that. And if you would change every slide to post-secondary, I would probably not beep in as much.
Well, I will make sure that we get some of that changes made. What I want to let you know too is that there's a person from the Board of Regents that attends all the post-secondary work group meetings, and this has been a big conversation with the certificates and how we're going to get everyone on board to actually collect the data. It's going to be a huge task, and Board of Regents is very happy. They're excited. They're excited that we're going to actually do something and drive it because they want the data too, right? So they're held to similar expectations at the post-secondary level for the percent of kids that start college and the percent of kids that finish. And if they had data to support the kids that were getting certificates and finishing programs, absent the official award of an associate's degree, they're very excited. They're like, oh, what can we do to support you? I'm like, well, follow up with a letter and make sure that everybody's on board to do this. So they're at the table. They want to do this. We're working collaboratively with the Board of Regents to make sure that our data is accurate, because we hand this data off to them, right? If we get to our goal and they can't graduate the kids and get them employed, we still haven't met it. We still haven't succeeded in our vision for the state, right? So we're in this together. It is a collaborative, and they are at the table. They will be helping us make sure our database is robust and complete and something that we can live with for a long time.
Steve.
Thank you. I love data. Live for data, love data. So I'm going to start with the number 2.
Okay.
Tim and Terry, a young man and a young woman that I will take credit for being part of their lives as an instructor to help turn them away from drugs and alcohol. In Tim's case, he was starting to smoke a lot of weed, and he was just a disaffected kid. I'll take credit for turning him around. And Terry was actually in a private school, and I met her, and she was having problems with her mom, and she was starting to drink, and her mom was alcoholic. But we had some really heart-to-heart conversations, and I helped put her on a better path. I'll take credit for those too. And I know we have a lot of educators on this board, but I want to single out my colleagues from Wichita and Fredonia. And I'm guessing that their numbers are in the dozens, if not hundreds, because they've had the opportunity to affect a lot of lives. I mean, a lot. Me as an educator, I've been in and out of the system. I mean, 1 foot in, 1 foot out. I've done a lot of things. You know, I've done a few different things. So as much as I love data, we have to keep in mind that to get to that 95%, as my colleague Mr. McNeese eloquently said, we've done the easy part. We have to do the hard part, and it's kid by kid. It's individual by individual. And there's a danger here in saying, hey, we're data-driven, folks. We are data-driven. That's fine up to a point. But then it comes down to Tim and Terry. And there may be other kids that I really helped turn around. You know, you don't know. I'll take credit for 2. And I've been a teacher off and on for 20 years. That's not a very high number. But I truly believe that I'm working with people who have saved dozens, if not hundreds, of kids from going down a really lousy path and appreciating their lives and their families and their communities more and more and more. And that's what this whole thing is about. So while I applaud being data-driven, and I just soon have the raw data as opposed to my fellow board members who like to see the summary data, give me the raw data. I'll go through it. But there's a danger here. And we can fall victim to it very easily, and I think a lot of other states do, and I think we can rise above that. I think for us to lead the world in the success of each student, we can not only be data-driven, but we can be driven by every family. And that's all I have to say at this time.
Thank you. I want to applaud the fact that we, as Jim said, are having different conversations. I think we are having conversations about meaningful ways to impact each child of Kansas, and I applaud you for that. And yeah, we're not there yet. We have a long way to go. But as I tell my children when they were at the proper age, you don't get 100% of the jobs you don't apply for, and you don't get 100% of the things you don't try. And so that's the fact that we're changing the conversation and focusing on each child. And I want my colleagues to think about this. This is, I'm not a mathematician, but I'm going to use math for a second here. Right now, about 87% of the kids that are currently in school are scheduled to graduate if we stay on the same path. Assuming there are 500,000 kids in Kansas, that means we're losing 85,000 kids over the next 13 years. If we go to 95%, we're still losing 25,000 kids over the next 15 years. See, I don't believe our goal of 95% is. I'm not willing to discredit 25,000 kids. I just want us to think about that, and people criticize us for a goal of 95%. Quite frankly, I think it's 5% short. But I don't even know where I'm going. But the fact is, we're talking about 85,000 individual students that most of those will be relegated to poverty if we don't find some way to intervene, or 25,000. I was at a conference, and and I will not mention, I was meeting with the president of the chairman of the Senate Education Committee in this particular state that does not have a state board of education. So it was they had basically the same role we had, plus some other things, and their goal next year was for 73% graduation rate. Now I could feel good about that, but I don't, because we're not responsible for the kids in that state. We're responsible for the kids in this state. And I just think that we need to always keep in mind that when we're saying 5% or 87% or 95%, then those kids that are not graduating, whatever that number is, they're individuals that have value and have worth. And I feel responsible for those that don't graduate too. I don't know where I was going with that, but that's it anyway. I don't see anything else. We really appreciate this. We appreciate the work that you're doing. You can tell by the fact that we have so many questions that we are very interested in this, and we are, I think I can speak for my colleagues, that we are all committed to the vision and want to make sure that each student is successful. Now, for my colleagues on the board, we're through a few minutes early, so there are two things that we did not finish yesterday. We're going to finish the board reports at this time, and then we're going to do board travel. And if we do that, then the only thing will be, we'll still take the break at 11:30 or before. And then the only thing left will be the presentation this afternoon. So Sally was going to do the report for migrants. She's asked to postpone that for another month. So I believe the only thing we have left is individual reports, if I can find the right page, from yesterday. And so if you have an individual report, would you be so kind as to sign in, and we'll go from there. Ann.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up on the comment I made yesterday about having openings on the advisory committee on career and tech ed. Anyway, what I have for you is a list of the positions that are open and an application form. So if you know business people in your area who might be interested in these, please let them know, and they can get their stuff to Stacy and his crew. In fact, I think, yeah, there's the place on here to send. So I'll send these down. I hope you're interested in reaching out to some business people, because we could sure use their help.
Are there other
Thank you,
individual,
Peggy, for making the copies.
are there other individual reports? Dina?
I visited Manhattan when Manhattan, Ogden, and you heard some folks talk about it yesterday. And it was located at K-State, had something to do with their summer program. And it's a STEM program, and they had little booths set up for the teachers and the kids to demonstrate what they had learned for their parents, their grandparents, aunts, uncles, whoever they wanted to bring. And it sounded to me like it started when they were fourth graders and extended until they were eighth graders. And each year, the parents sign their child up, and then those students are selected to be a part of that group. And they receive instruction from the college instructors as well as their instructors, or their teachers. And the teachers range from art teachers, and the teacher that's an art teacher isn't teaching art, but teaching some other kind of STEM program. And they also have students who need some observation hours that specifically are involved in some coursework that has a lot of labs, and so they don't have as much time to work observation in, so this program gives them that opportunity to get those hours during the summer. And everyone was excited, and the kids were learning things. They were telling me all about the things they'd learned. And that one young lady was telling me, I hated math, but I found out I had to do math to do whatever it was that she enjoyed working on. And there were robots running around. The engineering department was full of all these little cars and so on. So I'd encourage you, if you get an opportunity, an invitation to go, that you go visit, because it's exciting to talk to the children and find out what they've learned, and to see the excitement that they're talking about all the things that they learned, and how all of their course, all the things they'd learned during the year before was important for them to continue to learn in the areas that they chose that they wanted to learn more about. It was probably one of the best examples of project-based learning, just right there, a whole lobby full of it. So it was exciting, and like I said, I encourage all of you, if you're given that opportunity, to visit. And thank you for letting me share.
Thank you. Are there any other reports? If not, let's move to board travel. Anybody have additional travel for me?
Yeah, does that include future?
Oh, future agenda, okay. Yeah,
Thank you, Mr.
glad you
Chair.
keep keeping me on track.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm trying to think how to word everything I want to say, so I'm going to try to be very cautious in my wording. I would like to request an agenda item in the future regarding schools of education's training and administrator and training and regarding particularly young teachers coming into the buildings when they go in as first-year teachers, or when they're young, maybe even older ones, inappropriate contact with students. Is that a good way to word it?
Yeah.
And I'd like to see something on that, because after what we experienced yesterday, I really have no knowledge of what is done. And I would like to know how much, and also the if they are informed of the consequences of inappropriate, behavior. And then secondly, I would like to have a report on young people inappropriate behavior, or age inappropriate behavior. I don't know whether I'm doing this correctly, but I hope you understand what I'm asking for. So anyway, I would appreciate if those two items would be included in a future agenda. Thank you.
Steve?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I found this at Barnes & Noble, a tote bag with Catch-22 on it. I hope you all have read it. It's been a long time since I read it. I think it takes place in World War II, does it not? and it's Captain Yossarian. He's a bomber pilot, and he wants to get out of flying more bombing runs. But the military tells him that the only way you can get out of flying more bombing runs is to prove that you're mentally unbalanced. And the only way to prove that you're mentally unbalanced is to volunteer for more bombing runs. And that was Rule 22. It became known as Catch 22. So this is the metaphor I want to use for our STEM licensure. The legislature gave us the STEM license, and folks in their wisdom, or however you want to characterize it, decided that, well, we can't just give teaching licenses to anybody with a, say, a chemistry degree. So let's make sure that they have an offer of employment first. Well, I was just thinking that if I were to go back to the Barstow School, which is on the other side of state line, on the Missouri side, where my kids went to school, grades 7 through 12, I used to be on the tutoring staff there. And it'd be a great place to retire. Be just an awesome place. It'd be fun to teach math and physics at the Barstow School. I'm just thinking that they would probably want me to have a license before they offered me a contract. I mean, most schools would, right? So I think there's a catch-22 that we need to address with the STEM license, and I would like to put that on a future agenda item, that the mechanism by which we ask STEM licensees to have a job before we give them a license is almost like a catch-22. So I'd like to delve into that. The other thing is just to reiterate what a great opportunity I had in Louisville to go to the Skills USA National Championships. It was just really incredible. And I will reiterate that I got almost universal agreement with the talking point that you don't necessarily have to attend or matriculate at a college of education in order to be a really great instructor, at least in some areas. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Sally?
I'm a little like Janet on wanting to know how to word this on what I'm looking for. As I was listening to you yesterday, Dr. Watson, you do a really good job of giving us the information of what we need and on professional development and the decisions that we have to make, educating us about them. But I guess yesterday hit us, Janet and I both at the same time, but mine wasn't just around the sexual activity of our students. The opium thing just really hit me hard, and the numbers and with the trauma and everything, but also this sex trafficking issue in the state. I don't know where I can go as a board member to find out the information of how much influence, how much is sex trafficking part of our trauma problem? Is all of these issues around, how much are they affecting what, and do we need to know more as a board on some of these issues to understand what our teachers are dealing with? That's why I don't really know how to form this question on what I want. I want to know more about it. I don't know if the information around those issues would affect the decisions I make on this board or if they wouldn't, because I don't know enough information about those issues to know if they would be of help to me or not. But I would like to know more about that. And are we missing an area that we do need to be informed about? So I don't know if that's an agenda item or not. I guess my question is, what do you think? Do you think we need to know something about that?
So, are you asking about, say, human trafficking, sex trafficking as a agenda item like opioid abuse, or we could look at it through that lens. And the Attorney General's office has done a lot of work in the last several years around that topic. Or we could turn it upside down and say, students that present trauma and high levels of social emotional trauma, what are the outcomes that are likely for those students if there's no intervention, which may lead to a variety of things that both you and Janet have brought up. So how would you like for us to address it? Because one is more of a factual, here's what's happening in Kansas in terms of opioid abuse, here are the statistics, here are the counties. The other is looking at it from our side, saying if students that have high trauma, those are called ACEs, the higher ACE score you have, here's the percent that's more likely to be a drug abuser if there's no intervention. So there's two different groups of people that you would bring in to talk to you is the only reason I'm asking, Sally. One's more on the prevention and social side of it, more is one on the statistical data analysis side, policy side.
I don't know if I could make any decisions without knowing both sides to that. I guess, Randy, what you don't know, you don't know. And I'm telling you, I don't know if I need to be educated about that to serve on this board, but do I? And if that is, I would like that information. I personally find that interesting, and maybe it's covers some of my personal relationships with some kids, but is that something we need to know? And is anybody else interested in it? I just know that you do a good job of giving us professional development, and I'd like to know if that is something that you think we need some professional development around. I guess that's what my question is.
Yes.
Thank you. I would say, first, we need the data to see if it is, or if we can get it on the youth. See, I don't know whether we can. I mean, like that opioid thing, they didn't have the data for students. That's what I asked for. But if we could get the data, we would know if we have big a problem. And then if we get the data, then we need to maybe see what we're currently doing and what maybe we need to improve, I would think. Those would be, to me, they're two, I would agree with Sally, there's two separate issues here.
So the answer is yes.
Well, I'm just thinking more that this gets, and especially when it gets into legislation. I think, as we get into this more, and especially as people go before the legislature on some of these issues, all of those issues get thrown back in our lap. And they come back for more training for our teachers. And they come back with, I'd like to get ahead of something and behind something, but I need the rest of you to know whether you think that's an issue we need to get out in front of.
Yes.
It's a question.
My answer is yes. Okay.
Jim?
Yes, sir.
Hand waving isn't working.
Go ahead.
On future agenda items, we had information presented to us today on those three topics, that were central, and they gave us a lot of information. I'd like to go one step further. We've had workshops in the past where we had people come and present to us like this, and then we had more discussion. I'd like to follow that up with more discussion in terms of the graduation and attendance and think about the policies, rules, regulations that we create that have unintended consequences of forcing people out of the system. That would be one perspective. You might throw discipline in there as well. But I'd like to look at us in the near future, having some time on a Wednesday maybe, or to get some information, have a discussion, and we could even push for the school safety in that regard. The other is, yesterday I mentioned twice that we look at issues relative to transportation and safety. Both of them came up in budget requests. We have certainly had the opportunity to discuss or to at least voice our opinion on 2.5 or whatever. What does that mean? In an urban area in the state of Kansas today, I'd like to have the opportunity to look at that or to. Transportation. Put a study group together, report back. We're spending a lot of money on transportation. Districts are spending a lot of money. Goddard, for instance, does everybody. Derby basically does everybody. Okay, and are there kids at risk because we have an archaic funding philosophy? Also, safety. The legislature came out this year and put $5 million into school safety. It was a good start. I don't want to call it a knee-jerk reaction to the Florida incident, Parkland incident, but it came right after that. People wanted to do something. But Randy, I have to say that we have not addressed safety as a board and its over-encompassing issues relative to school safety. And we need to do that. Future agenda item, workshop item, but I'd almost go with, we need to have our partners through the state involved, which could range from the legislature to KSB to KNEA to other players. That we can't look at this as we're just going to throw $5-10 million at it. It's going to be better. We have to have a comprehensive, I think, a plan that addresses it in our state. And Randy, I know we have a plan from the past, and we need to probably dust it off, bring it out, and move forward. There are a lot of resources out there that I mentioned today earlier. West High School is doing great stuff. Well, one of the things I failed to mention is a partnership they have with United Way. They're putting about $1 million into the West High feeder system, which means that all the schools that feed into West High in Wichita, to improve attendance. And it's a great program. I don't know a lot about it, but there are a lot of great programs out there that are happening that we need to probably be more aware of, hear from, and applaud and encourage, growth. So I'd love to look at those kinds of programs that are being successful. It doesn't mean that they reach 95%, attendance, through this, but their goal is to do that. And it involves the courts. It involves many times family interventions. I know a few years ago they had a program where chronic absentee people were brought in on Saturdays and had to report to a committee of professionals that were there not to chastise them, but to report back and say, here we are, or here's the challenges we have. These students were identified, and I just don't want to get the whole program, but but because of funding issues, both at the judiciary level and at the school level, that program went away. And though it was only helping about 25 families, that was 25 families they were helping. And they were all in the chronic absenteeism, and they were having success. It didn't end because it wasn't functioning well. It ended because of finance. Both at the judiciary level, and they were working with the judiciary. In fact, one of the reasons they all showed up is they're under court order. But there are things like that we need to look at. So if we could look at those in the future, I really appreciate that.
And I want to follow up on that. Many of the things that you mentioned are issues that we don't have total control over, and in order to address them, we have to look outside our agency and form partnerships to do that. And so I would encourage us to discuss how best to do that, to add on to that too, because we don't make the rules on transportation. We just know how they affect kids. And so we'll have to have cooperation from the legislature if we do something different. We don't, poverty affects our students, but we can't fix poverty ourselves. We have to involve other people to help that process. And so
Amen.
Anything that we can do to build relationships with other people, with other agencies to help us do that, I would hope that we would do that too, Ken.
Mr. Chairman, I think that this recent conversation reflects a need in a number of different areas for us to have to be better educated ourselves before we have to make decisions. And anything we could do to make that, to have a more factual or a solid base of information when we get to that budget fiasco would be really helpful, I think. I mean, we're expected to make recommendations on things we haven't even, we don't understand, we just don't. So I think that would be very helpful. And I think it was Sally was mentioning the trafficking issue. Kathy and I attended a fabulous seminar last year, by Jenna Quinn, out of Oklahoma, out of Texas, I think. And I know that Kathy has gone farther than I did and has gotten some actual curriculum that's available for schools. And maybe you've seen it, maybe you all have talked about it when I wasn't here or something, but I think it would be helpful to us, good for our understanding, to have either a work session or have her come in and speak more directly to policy issues that we could use or develop to prevent the kinds of experiences that she had, because they're going on, obviously, and they're going on with our kids, but we don't know how to affect them. So, and the point that was made today, I think, was that we don't have ultimate control over much, but we can influence some things. And the better we understand them, the better we can influence them. And so I won't be here to experience it, but I'd like to see that the board become more effective and more well-informed about some of those issues.
I know that Kathy has been in direct contact with the person you talked about numerous times, and is working with that through our Mental Health Advisory Council, is actually doing some work there that I think that we need to make sure that we keep abreast of what they're doing, because I think it directly addresses what you're talking about.
I agree.
Anything else? Okay, travel.
I have one. Tomorrow would like to go to the new superintendent's budget workshop in Salina,
Okay.
salary and mileage.
Anybody else? Anybody else on this side? This side. Ann?
I just had one. Kent mentioned yesterday an SECD workshop in Lawrence on August 31st. I don't have the details, but I'd like to go to that. I think they're going to train teachers on SECD issues. So in Lawrence, I'll try to find out how long it is. And
Is it the 28th?
I had August 31st.
Because there's one in Manhattan.
Okay, Dina,
I'd like to attend, actually, two workshops in Salina that have to do with school finance, and one of them is first-year superintendents, and another's the one for everyone. That'll be the 12th for the first-year soups, and the 24th for the one for everyone. And I'd like I think it would probably be the 30th, the Monday only CTE summer conference in Manhattan.
anything else from
And that'll be
anybody?
it.
See?
Is it too early to put in for an August date?
No.
Or is it appropriate?
No, it is not too early.
Not too early. August 28th is going to be STEM Day with the T-Bones. So I'd like to represent the board in that function. have a day of salary. I'll be spending the whole day with them. So it's through Piper School District is running lead on this, but of course it's open to anybody. It'll be STEM day with the T-Bones. And I think the first pitch is 11 something a.m. It's an early game, but that's August 28th. It's a Tuesday.
Motion would be in order to approve the travel. Janet? Dina? Seconds the motion. Further discussion? All in favor, raise your hand. All opposed? Motion carries. Note that Mr. Willard is out of the room. And we're going to have a working lunch. We'll reconvene. We're going to be about 5 minutes late. We'll reconvene at 10 till 12. If you haven't paid Randy yet, I understand that pizza's available somewhere. Give Randy some money. We'll reconvene here at the table and eat and listen to the presentation from Teach for America. Next month, we are going to have a really abbreviated time on Wednesday because we need to leave here by 10:45 to get to the governor's mansion. So anybody that has an we'll try to do the committee reports, but anybody that has an individual report, please send that to Peggy in writing and we'll put it in the folders. Because I will not call for, nor will we have time for individual reports. That would be fine, but I will call for committee reports if you want. Your seats?
She loves that. Well, someday I'm hoping she ever, as a family, she comes closer.
You get to watch a seat. Kathy Bush, our vice president, our vice chairman is out of the state, but she will be joining us on the phone about 5 minutes after 12. And I believe that Bacon had to leave, but the rest of us should be here. Usually the board members are a little more compliant than they apparently are now. So we'll wait. We'll wait, and I will humiliate them when they come in.
All the important ones are here.
Now.
Well, now is now, yeah. I agree.
Because I didn't want to get grease on the computer, I shut my computer off, so from now on, we'll have to use the old-fashioned way of indicating that you want to ask a question. You'll have to wave or throw something at me. We have today a presentation for Teach for America. Would you please introduce yourself to us, and then the floor is yours.
All right, thank you so much. So my name is Chris Rawson. I'm the executive director at Teach for America, the Kansas City region. As you'll see from our presentation, we've been operating on the Missouri side for about 10 years. And we are certainly, as of last year, started operating on the Kansas side and excited to partner with the state board to find a way to replicate our success on the Missouri side on the Kansas side. So with that, I will turn it to Spencer Hardwick from my team to take us through the first part of the presentation.
Welcome to the State Board of Education.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, Chris. I'm Spencer Hardwick, the Chief of Staff for Teach for America Kansas City. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about what exactly it is that our organization does and what we've been doing for the past 10 years in the state of Missouri and what we hope to do in the state of Kansas. So our mission is that one day all children in the station will have the opportunity to attain an excellent education. It's important that I start with this because it's at the foundation of what we do, and it's important that one thing that we all really have in common in this room is that we're approaching education as a major lever, not only to impact our kids, but to impact our country at large. And so when we think about that, this lever of education, we think that it's part of a larger interconnected system, and we know that it doesn't operate in a silo. We know that the biggest solutions for our schools and our classrooms often have to do with integrating with our history and culture, housing, the economic sector, healthcare. All these things are very interconnected in the way that our society functions. But we decide to approach this through our classrooms. And we know that one of the most important levers that you can hit in a classroom is making sure that the teacher in front of our students is the right person for the job. And so in terms of, people ask me all the time, so what exactly is it that you do? No sentence really articulates it more eloquently than this one. Teach for America finds, develops, and supports a diverse network of leaders who expand opportunity for children from classrooms, schools, and every sector and field that shape the broader systems in which schools operate. It's a pretty clean, straight to the point definition, and I'm going to dig in a little bit about what that means in terms of what we do. The first thing we do is that we find really promising people. And I'm happy to dig into what that looks like in terms of numbers and in terms of quality as we go about the presentation. And then we make sure that those people are put into positions where they can impact our students in the form of teaching, but also eventually lead and learn from the different communities that they're serving in. Beyond that, we want to develop them as change agents within their community. So this is not just a teaching organization. We're looking for people who are really committed to their community and want to learn from their community and then help change it and advance the causes within their different communities. And then the last thing we want to do is facilitate them to foster collective leadership. When I talk to people about what we do, it's not that we're just bringing them teachers. We want to bring you communities of really invested, charged up, energetic individuals who really want to make sure that our schools are in a great spot. And so there are a few traits that we look at that really define who we are as an organization. Some of the biggest ones I'll talk about are having perseverance. You can bring a valedictorian into a great high school, but if they don't have the perseverance to get through a year or 2 or 3 or 10 years worth of teaching, you know, we're not really doing a lot. They're committed to long-term to reaching the different goals set out by our different communities. So when I think of our Kansas Can outcomes, we want teachers who are really committed to the vision that you all have set forth for our teachers. And then a strong record of achievement is something that we really, really look for. We're looking for those high flyers who have done great things on their college campuses, great things in their career, and who can also do great things inside their classrooms and outside their classrooms. So to give you a few numbers, to layer on some numbers as to exactly what we're talking about, here's a breakdown, and here are a few numbers in terms of what it looks like to be a Teach for America Corps member. We go between an 8 to 12% acceptance rate. Average grade point average in college was 3.7. 13,000 of our graduates come from top 30 schools, and 4,000 of our graduates come from Ivy League universities, and 1,000 come from historically black colleges and universities. So beyond just numbers in terms of what they're able to achieve, we also place a big premium on diversity. As you can see in the upper right-hand corner, very diverse teaching corps, and we know that diversity goes beyond skin color, and so that's why 1/3 of our corps members come from a low-income background. We know that what can be a big obstacle for some teachers is not being able to connect with their kids the moment they get into the door, and so we really want to attract and recruit a corps that's not only excellent in the classroom, but also share some of the experiences, either along racial, socioeconomic, gender, or geographical lines of our students. And in terms of a quick overview of what exactly it is that once we get these really talented people, where do they go and what do they do? Once they've been recruited, they do pre-corps training, summits, webinars, come visit the schools. And then we know with 53 regions around the country, it's really important that our corps members learn about the different communities that they're going to be serving in. So they're on site, they come to our cities for about a week, and we spend the time learning about what that city has meant. For Kansas City region, that has meant coming to Topeka and seeing Brown versus Board of Education. It's meant seeing different parts of Kansas City. We know that if I'm going to bring, you know, a really talented person from University of California or University of Denver, that it's really important for them to understand what they're teaching and who they're going to be teaching. Then they'll go to a 6-week-long summer institute where they'll learn the fundamentals of good teaching, culturally responsive pedagogy, and a little bit about social and emotional learning. And then we'll send them forth into a classroom where they'll spend the next 2 years not just being teachers, but also being coached by our Teach for America staff members and being supported and having professional development interspersed throughout both of those 2 years of teaching. And so in terms of the impact that we've been able to have over the last 27 years, there are a couple stats and figures here that I'm particularly proud of. We are currently the largest source of educators serving in low-income communities. We're the most diverse source of educators serving across public schools. And in an age where math and science mean more than ever for our students, we're the largest source of STEM educators in the country. In terms of what our teachers actually do, I know some have questions around how long are they getting trained, or what does it mean in terms of outcomes for kids, which is why we're all here. On average, according to a study done by Mathematica in 2013, Teach for America math teachers compared to non-Teach for America teachers, their students are learning 2.6 more in terms of math and 1.3 months in terms of reading than their comparative teachers. In terms of how our principals feel about the program, we should know another really important piece to what we do. Nationally, 90% principal satisfaction. Locally, here with the Kansas City region, recently experienced 100% principal satisfaction. So it's not just bringing in really talented people, getting them trained up. We know at the end goal, it's really about our students, and it's really about serving our communities and our principals as well. Now, teaching is only one part of this, but we all know that being a part of this board, that there's so many different moving parts of what does it mean to have a strong and robust and healthy education system. So it's also important to highlight the work that our teachers are doing after the 2 years that they've been in the Corps. You'll note that 15% of our teachers, our Corps members, come in thinking that they're going to be doing education beyond Teach for America. And by the time they leave or they're done, 65% are working directly in education, myself included. I wanted to go to Harvard Law School. It turns out that my true passion, my future, was in a classroom in Kansas City, Missouri, and now on Teach for America staff. And then beyond that, 85% of our Corps members and alumni go on to either teach or serve in low-income communities or deal directly in education. And so as you see in the positions on the screen, that can take the form of policy advocates, elected officials, union leaders, elected school board members, principals, and of course, over 13,000 teachers in the classroom nationwide. What this has meant locally in Kansas City is that over the past 2 years in the Kansas City Public School District, the last two teachers of the year were Teach for America alumni. This is also the same case for Raytown, and we also had a Teacher of the Year candidate in Pathways Academy. And in 2016, all three finalists for the Kansas City Public School District were Teach for America Corps members. Nationally, we've had one Teacher of the Year, over 30 state Teachers of the Year, over 200 district Teachers of the Year, and over 800 school Teachers of the Year, period. This, again, just speaks to the quality not only of our Corps members, but what they're able to do afterward and the work they're able to do inside their classrooms. But as we alluded to at the beginning of the presentation, it's not just about what's inside the classroom. Here, we see that once we have our two core regions in the state of Missouri, St. Louis and Kansas City, we see that teachers don't just stay in those city hubs. They move throughout the state. And so this has been the story of Missouri over the last, we'll call 10 to 15 years. Is our teachers not only stay in these communities, 70% actually aren't even from Missouri, but they end up staying in Missouri and moving to different communities and impacting education through different ways. And so just to do a quick spotlight in Kansas City, one of the more nationally known schools within Teach for America is the Ewing Marion Coffin School, which was founded by Teach for America Corps member Hannah Loftus. That school is currently first in biology, and it's second in algebra in the state. And these are students who have historically scored in the bottom third of their percentile on different state tests. This just speaks to when you get a Teach for America Corps member or a community, you're not only getting teachers, you're not only getting leaders, you're getting schools, and again, invested individuals who are going to stay and create lasting impacts for what that means. I also know that one of the Kansas CAN's outcomes is focused on social and emotional learning. When we look at the Mott Haven School in New York, one of their specialties is social and emotional learning. That has been a huge focus within Teach for America over the last 6 to 7 years. It's really focused on what does it mean to really represent and engage kids who look at times different than their teachers. These are just a few of the schools, networks that we founded across the country: KIPP, Yes Prep, Phoenix, Citizens of the World, and just speaks again to the footprint and the impact of what goes beyond just having the 2-year commitment to the Corps. And in terms of what we're doing outside the classroom, a 2011 Harvard study shows that more founders and top leaders of entrepreneurial education organizations start at Teach for America, and that's more than anyone else. And you look at any other organization placing teachers. Education is not just about teaching in classroom, although it's a large part of it. It's about ideas. It's about innovation. And so when we think about the innovation, engagement, and the venture that we're undergoing in Kansas, this is an important component of what that could be about. We also shape public policy, over 190 elected officials, over 80 in senior organizing roles. We have 2 gubernatorial candidates currently. Teach for America has been around for about 27 years, and the bet that we're making is that generationally, injecting really talented people into our classrooms, into our school systems, creates change because they're in different parts of that system, activating and agitating different parts of that system. And so this just speaks to what that can look like in terms of legislation or in terms of public policy. I'm now going to turn it over to our Executive Director, Chris Roston, to talk about what this could really mean for the state of Kansas. Thank you all again for your time.
Thank you all so much. And as I walk through this, we will stop, I promise. Stop talking at some point. We'll have opportunity for questions. So this just gives a quick overview of where all of our alums, everybody who's done the program, where they reside. And so as you can see, they're heavily concentrated on the coast and sort of in the Midwest, we've got some concentration, but particularly if you look at the state of Kansas, what we were finding over time is that even though we did not have a region in the state of Kansas, quite a number, about 50 folks, were still finding their way to the Kansas region, teaching and leading in other ways. And so but then at the same time, while intentionally being in Missouri, we're having, as Spencer showed, we got 1,000+ folks who are teaching across the state, 70% of which didn't call Missouri home prior to doing Teach for America, and teaching in 100+ different zip codes, right? So it was really an opportunity for us to see how can we replicate and redirect the talent pipeline that we have nationally out of the state of Missouri and move more of that to the state of Kansas. Just a quick snapshot. So as I said, last year, without any sort of state level support, we decided to begin placing in Kansas. We had 2 core members that are actively teaching in the Kansas City, Kansas School District. Miles Hartman, who's there at the top, he's one of them. And you can get sort of a couple bullets on his background to get an idea of what the sort of, we talk big numbers, but if you want to sort of zoom in on the kind of person we're actually talking about, you can get a sense there. The next 3 individuals that we highlight there are alums of our program that have found their way to Kansas and will be teaching in Kansas or leading in Kansas in a variety of ways currently. So Emily Holmes, who's a Kansas native but has moved to Topeka and is going to be part of the all-day pre-K program here in this county. And then a couple of other folks in the private sector, including, as you see there, some investment beyond the education space. And so really when you think about our program, what we're offering is a solution that's twofold, right? On the short term, you've got a teacher shortage need that we're trying to help solve and trying to raise the bar for students everywhere, particularly in low-income communities. And on the second end of that, we're trying to address our workforce development challenge, particularly as a Kansas City native, something that resonates with me, just knowing that so many of our brightest folks leave the region, and we really serve as a really valuable lever to bring talented folks to the region. The other thing that we looked at when considering expanding was, of course, the Kansas Can program and how do we align. And there were 3 big areas there. Without walking through them in detail, we felt like those 3 areas of social-emotional growth, kindergarten readiness, and high school graduation rates were the 3 that our program most closely aligned for our ability to help support. And then finally, what we proposed and what we took to the legislature in this past cycle was a pilot expansion for this current school year, this upcoming school year, and these were the 3 big components. What you'll see, just sort of some geography of the slide here, is that the proposed is what we took and the projected is what we actually believe where we're going to land based on what we've been able to partner with the districts and achieve. So first and foremost, we asked to have one of our national TFA recruiters in the region, so in the state of Kansas. To give you some context, we have not had a recruiter from our national organization in this region for many, many years. And what that means is that the individuals who are assigned to quote unquote recruit from the KUs, the Emporia states, the K-states of the world, live in Chicago or LA or somewhere else and are not as available to go to the recruitment events, to have the coffee chats with these talented folks that are coming from this region and get more and more folks from the state of Kansas into our program.
Let me interrupt you just a second. Our vice chair just got on and she has trouble hearing, so you can make sure you're almost
How's that?
Almost
How's
eating,
that?
almost eating the mic.
Almost eating the mic. Well, your pizza looks better than this mic, I'll tell you that much. Is that a little better?
Can you hear Kathy? Yeah, I can hear. Okay.
And so part of what we wanted to do in the state of Kansas was not just bring our talent pipeline here, but what we know is that a large number of folks, regardless of where they get placed, if they have ties to the region, have a better chance of staying in the region long term. And some of those folks that we talked about, right? So if they're coming from an Arkansas, Kansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, anywhere in this region, they have a really strong likelihood of beyond their 2-year staying. And so we've had a really great success rate of keeping people, 85% plus folks that finish our program stay in the region. But we know that that job's made a lot easier if they have some sort of familial or professional or academic tie to the region. So we asked them to help us support hiring a recruiter, which we were successful in doing so. And that recruiter will reside in Lawrence, but we'll be recruiting across the entire state of Kansas. The second thing, and the bulk of what we ask for, is to underwrite our ability to recruit, train, and support these folks, and that we put a number that we thought was realistic of up to 12 moving into this next school year, knowing that we're at 2 now and we wanted to place up to the 12. And so you can see a bit of the cost breakdown associated with that. What you'll see on the projected is that we have a pathway now for 9. We're not going to get to the 12. I don't believe that's going to happen this year. And so the realistic landing point is up to that 9. And I actually have Shelley from the KCK school district that'll talk a little bit about how you guys can help us get the final 4 to get that number up to that 9 number here in a moment. And then lastly, we wanted to host a day of professional development at Brown vs. Board. And so we thought it was really important, not just for our folks that are placed in Kansas, but for our entire core of 120 folks to come to the state of Kansas, and while they're here, to realize that there's incredible historical significance to teaching in the state, and there's incredible opportunity to be had here in the state of Kansas. And so we feel like that's a really important learning experience for them, but also is important in broadening their understanding of the region beyond the sort of 816, 913 sort of code there. And so the last thing that I will say is, when we look forward, what we're hoping to do with the pilot beyond this next school year is that get to a point in the short term of recruiting about 5 to 20 every year specifically for the state of Kansas. So again, we're going to bring in around 70 or so folks, but we want to be able to place over the next year or so 5 to 20 on an annual basis, always on the Kansas side. We also know that over time we'd like to grow that to more like a 30 to 50, which is more traditional of how we've been able to get to that sort of geographic footprint that we've done in Missouri. On the district partnership side of things, we know that in the short term right now, for a lot of real strong reasons, and I can share them with you if you guys are interested, partnering with the KCK district and the early childhood centers that are sort of in that Wyandotte and Johnson County sort of area makes a lot of sense for us. But we would like to continue to expand westward, particularly in the Topeka and Wichita markets. It makes the most sense for need alignment to our program in terms of the student population. And then finally, right now, knowing that the majority of our alums sit on the Missouri side, we want to continue to create opportunities where we're coming to the legislature. We're giving these sort of exposure opportunities for folks that are alums of our program that are sitting in the Missouri side, bringing them into the state of Kansas. But as the alumni population grows in the state of Kansas, hosting some variety of events specifically for the folks in the state of Kansas. And with that, I will turn it to Shelley to give you guys a quick update, okay? And then we'll be done.
Good afternoon. I've been here in front of you before talking about teaching fellows, and I'm excited to talk with you about the Teach for America and how we're utilizing them in our district. We started a partnership 2 years ago. As you know, we've told you in other times, is that we have a hard time filling some of our vacancies. So we met with Chris and his staff, and last year we had our first 2 teachers in our program, or in our classrooms. They actually were taking coursework through Pittsburgh State University, who is our partner, and I'm happy to report they both were very successful in the classroom and returning. And so as we have continued to struggle to fill some of our vacancies, we have continued to reach out to Teach for America. And we currently have already hired 3. Those 3 individuals will be going through on a restricted license and be with Pittsburgh State University and are assigned to our classrooms. We currently have 4 that are in the Teach for America vacancy pool that we would like to assign. For different reasons, they don't qualify for a restricted license. I have vetted through all of their applications and through their resumes and feel like they would be a great fit for our district. Our principals, at least 2 of them have talked to those 4. It's a little hard right now because they're on vacation, but we're trying to seek to get more placement. These 4 would fill 4 more vacancies. Just to kind of give you an idea, as of today, we still have 30 general education vacancies, and we still have 29 special ed vacancies. So we need teachers, but let me be real clear, we're not willing to put just anybody in front of our kids. And I feel confident that the individuals that we get through Teach for America and that we talk to and we vet through ourselves are good additions to our classrooms. So we appreciate you listening to our information, and I'll be glad, just like Chris, to answer any questions you might have.
I see Susan is here. What are what, if any, are the licensure barriers? Say to those 4 that you indicated did not qualify for. I may be asking a whole bunch of people this question.
So I can preliminarily kind of answer, and then Susan will fix anything I say wrong. So what we did when we had the original conversation with Chris was to go through the candidates one by one, to look at transcripts, to look at licenses we already had in place that we might be able to offer them. During the course of this conversation, Susan leaned over and said, what about that other elementary one? So there still may be some work that we need to do in looking at transcripts and whatnot to see how we can get them licensed and help them get into the classroom.
But do we think we can?
I'm
I'm not asking you for,
Yeah,
a guarantee.
I think we have a lot of options for them that they may not have been aware of in the beginning. And so that's the piece that it was nice to get on the phone with Kansas City and be able to go through each candidate one by one. And again, as I said, look at current options, because there are many. There are many pathways. You heard restricted license, you heard the fellows program mentioned. There are ways. We've even talked about seeing if a couple of them might fit into our current pilot options.
Okay, thank you. I guess you're off the hook, Susan.
No, I did review their list of teachers, so we've kind of been corresponding back and forth.
And we're working to make that work. Okay.
I do think, though, one thing on that point that Randy and I have talked about, and certainly we've talked about, is that there are some geographic limitations to some of that, right? So the Innovative School District allowed for us to partner with KCK initially, and there's a pathway there. The elementary pilot that she was referencing does allow us to place broadly beyond that district boundary, but it is restricted to elementary, right? And so as Spencer walked through, some of our finest teachers, being that top supplier of STEM educators, come in the middle school and high school range, science, math, in those subject areas. And so we do have a certification barrier to place those candidates statewide, but we are committed to working with the department to identify something and come back to you guys at some point down the road with another pathway for those sorts of folks.
Now, many generations, probably prior to your birth, there was a teacher corps or something like that. Is this similar?
Well, if it was prior to my birth, sir, I'm not sure that I'm obligated to speak on that.
The reason I ask is because I inherited 2 people that came in Missouri, 2 people that came to St. Louis through the teacher corps. When I graduated from Harvard, when I graduated from Georgetown, and then they moved out. They finished their obligation, didn't want to stay in St. Louis, and moved out to the rural area where I was superintendent, and they turned out to be outstanding teachers. And this,
well, in that case, we're just like that.
and this sounds to be a reinvention of that particular program. So my experience with that was very positive, but.
Well, from what you're describing, it is similar, right? So they are folks graduating from top universities with high GPAs and a track record of leadership. They are, however, by all indications, they go through a really grueling process. Again, we get 50,000 some applications a year. We only take about 4,000 folks every year that make it to the classroom. And so we vet them deeply right? With the intention that they will have every opportunity to be successful in the classroom. They do, as we walked through, they teach summer school over the course of the summer while getting PD, a really intensive PD. I mean, these folks go, I guess if I could say anything, they go through hell to try to become educators in our neediest areas, right? And when you get an opportunity to go into classrooms with these folks and you hear them and the grit and resolve that they have to not just do good on the day that they're teaching, but to hear how can they get better time and time again, it really is a pretty impressive and inspiring thing.
And I'm going to talk about the elephant in the room. We're different from Missouri. Our structure is different from Missouri in that we have self-executing powers. We're responsible for who's in the classroom. You can't know what you don't know. And it would have been so much better if we were having this discussion in February and March. But you didn't know that. And so I'm not blaming you. I'm just saying that this, because to be ready for school to start, that would have been, and that's not your fault. It's just that we're different because in Missouri, the State Board of Education is advisory. Here, we're not advisory.
Yeah.
And so I've discussed that with John and others like that, and I'm sure you're aware of that. And
I am now.
But we also need to recognize that we do, in fact, have places that we can't find teachers, can't find quality teachers, and we need to be doing whatever is necessary to partner with people. I wish we'd started earlier, but I tell my kids all the time, don't tell me what I should have done because it's over, you know. And so I'm violating my rule by even bringing this up. But that's something that we all are aware of. This was just placed as a proviso in the budget without us knowing it, you know.
Yeah.
And then and you have a good reputation. And the program has a good reputation, and we, at least, I can't speak for us, but we recognize that, and we do have a shortage, and we recognize that. And so I'm interested in finding ways to partnership with whoever can help us to do that. Now, let me ask, I'm going to ask a financial question.
Sure.
You indicated, you gave us a breakdown of on that page. Is the amount that we're responsible for, we have the money, we have a responsibility
Absolutely,
to distribute the money. Are we going to distribute that money to you? I mean, I know the $80,000 and the $10,000, that's a given.
Yeah.
But are we going to distribute the other amount based on the number of, is that going to be $36,000? So if there's 5, it's going to be 36 times 5. If there's 12, it's going to be 36 times 12.
That's correct. That's correct. So,
so we're not just writing you a check for 500.
No, it's a per unit.
I just wanted to share, I know that you all are familiar with the Fellows Program.
Yes.
And so I wanted to let you know, and I apologize for not saying this earlier, these individuals, the 4 that we're talking about, will be required to be in our Fellows Program, which means that they're going to be taking the courses, attending all of the sessions. These 4 have been in their summer institute in Texas, while we had our summer institute here in Kansas City. But they take the same 3 courses. They do classroom management, cultural responsiveness, and lesson planning and design during the summer. So these 4 have had the same courses, but they will be required to go into our program directly, which will meet that requirement in terms of their licensure, hopefully.
And when you said they were working with Pittsburgh State, I assumed that. So,
Yes, sir.
So,
Yeah.
but Kansas City, because you're an innovative school district, is better suited than Pittsburgh or in my area, you know, someplace like Lewisburg. And so I'm just wanting to make sure that we're okay everywhere.
Thank you.
Yeah, that is, and that's where I think so when we talk about, so I'll answer 2 questions because I heard what I thought was sort of emerging in other ones. So when we talk about expanding beyond the KCK boundaries, I do think that's where we're going to have some continued work to make sure there is a pathway to a full teacher license in the state of Kansas for them to do that, because when we talk about retention and retaining them past their 2 years, we're going to have a much better shot of retaining them past their 2 years if they have some mobility within the state to teach, right? And so right now, some of these folks that we have in KCK are not going to have that privilege, right? And so it helps us in the short term, and hopefully they'll stay and they'll teach in KCK for a long time. But we do know that life happens to these young people and they move all over. And so we want to make sure that they have that sort of flexibility within the state. Back to your other question, though, yes, you are correct. You can almost think of it as like a per unit. So what we are sort of asking is approval for this sort of budget, right? Knowing that Randy and team will have responsibility to ensure that we actually have placed a certain number of teachers, and are only paying for those teachers that we have placed, and not for those that we don't place.
And let me ask another Kansas City question. When they finish your whatever it is, your program, are they licensable?
Some are and some are not. And the reason being is if they've gone through the Pittsburgh State and have gone on the restricted license, they met all the qualifications of the program, finished all the courses. When they finish, they're eligible for their initial license. And before,
at that point, they could go anywhere. You
They
don't
could.
want them to, but they could.
That's exactly right. We try to keep them there. On the other hand, though, we have those individuals who we've come before you before to have the certificates approved, the coalition certificates. Those individuals can only teach in the Kansas City, Kansas district. As you recall, they still have to finish all the coursework. They're expected to do that to maintain their job. But in order to continue to teach, they have to stay in our district on that certificate. They cannot go outside of our district.
And what else would they have to do in addition to what the coursework that you require to get an initial certificate?
Well, the ones that are on certificate won't be eligible to ever get a license because they haven't, they didn't meet the requirements for the Pitt State. So I think what we're trying to say is there a way we can move more people in? I'll give you an example. I have a young man who has a communication studies degree, and we would like to hire him for English language arts. But when he goes, his transcript is reviewed at Pitt State, he doesn't have all the coursework to meet the requirements to be in that content. So they cannot put him on a restricted license. We would like to hire him, though, because after I talked with him and the principal talked with him, we felt like he could be a good middle school English language arts teacher. So we would like to put them into our program, the Fellows program, and continue to build their skills just like we have with the others on certificates.
And right now, you have that option, or you do not have that option?
Right now, we don't have that option. They would have to be a certificate right now, at this point, this late in the year, so.
I think I've asked you I think I've exceeded my knowledge.
If you think of something else, just let me know.
Well, and I think conversely, we've run into that same thing in the sciences fields, right? So we had some folks that were, graduate degrees in chemical engineering, and they want to teach middle school science, but somehow, when they go through transcript review, they have, they don't quite have it's all in the same field, but they don't quite have the right requirements, right? And so you have a school saying, well, gosh, I got this kid from University of Virginia with a chemical engineering degree. I'd love to hire them as a middle school science teacher. I can't quite make that fit under the current pathway. And again, with all of these folks, what we've done is we go through the process of having Pitt State review the transcripts, and it's really trying to get it lined up with the opening and the certification pathway. And I think that's where, as a longer term step, we'd like to work to try to find some other process that this body would approve so that we could have more folks coming in. Because again, we're bringing 75 or so folks every year, and the only thing that's limiting that flow is those sorts of nuances there.
And I think that we would be, again, I'm speaking for myself, open to discussions on legitimate barriers.
Sure. You look like you're ready to say something.
I'll defer to Ken first. He'll be more diplomatic than I.
Mr. Chairman, well, it's just evident to me from my understanding of this conversation and this presentation is that we do have some systemic barriers that may not be really viable when we have candidates of this quality coming to us. And that's always been the situation. We've made some progress on eliminating some of those barriers, but I don't think we've gotten there yet. And so I really do think that there's work to be done. It seems a shame to me when we have a shortage of teachers in areas like science, that we have people with those qualifications that can't teach in our classroom because they haven't dotted the right I's or filled in the right blanks. And it's not that that work is not important, but their life experience and their training may supersede some of those requirements. And I think we need to take a really serious look at that going forward. I like everything I've ever heard about Teach for America, and I'm impressed by the presentation today. I would just like to make sure that we are a place where you can thrive and that we can partner together to be good working partners, like you've been able to accomplish apparently in the state of Missouri. Hopefully, the students that come in that would come through your program would like to locate in some rural areas. You know, that's where we have some real problems in filling positions, and it's not just in the metro areas. And we're largely rural, as you know. So.
Yeah. One thing, so my head of program, or sort of like chief academic officer that we have on staff, she couldn't be here today because she's on leave, but her hometown's Alma, Kansas, right? And so she tells us all the time that, you know, the same needs that we see in the urban core, they've got very similar types of needs in rural and western Kansas, right? And so it would be our hope that we have folks that go through our program and that are equity-minded and committed to this work of education for a lifetime and take on some of those challenges head-on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. By the way, some of us didn't realize you didn't have your hand raising up, so like Sally and Ann are both on here. So.
That's probably because you didn't pay attention when I announced that.
Did you announce that? Well, I'm slow. What can I say? That's what I kind of figured, so oops, sorry. Okay, I have a question for KCK. And maybe Susan, I don't know. First of all, my first question is, if they do not have or maybe this is Susan first, they do not have the coursework necessary to get the language arts certificate, can they test out of that, or is that not possible due to the fact that they don't already have a license? I think maybe I've answered my question, but I'm not sure.
So for the restricted teaching license, right now your regs say that you have a degree in the content, and then because it's based on having the content knowledge, and then you're delivered the professional ed while you're teaching. So the content knowledge, the way the regs are written, say you have a degree in the subject that you want to teach, right, and then you further validate that by passing the content test in that content area. There's a give in the reg by saying if you don't have a degree, if you have equivalent coursework with the intent that that's equivalent to a major in it, then you can also qualify. And then the third option, if you're a heritage language speaker and you want to teach that language. So that's the way the current reg is written. So a communications degree for English language arts, that would have required that analysis by the university.
Okay, so I guess I don't understand. This wouldn't qualify? I'm not understanding.
Based on the university that did the analysis, no, they did not.
So the university would have to make that determination?
They make that decision.
Okay. Because I knew that you could test, but you have to have your license. You don't have to have your license. Okay, I'm understanding.
Right. That's the main requirement for the restricted. Content knowledge verified by the degree, or if they do the analysis, appropriate coursework, and then take the test and then bring them in, they start teaching and they pick up, I think it's about 21 hours, and that usually includes internship credits.
I guess I'm thinking about those who currently have a license that could test out in another area.
Oh, yeah, if you're already licensed,
that's what I thought.
You can add endorsements based on content testing.
Okay, that's what I want to, but I want to ask you another question. I'm curious, I don't know this data, so you're going to have to give it to me. Where were you last year as far as vacancies, you know, approximately the same time? And how many, or as a multiple questions here, how, do you have any idea of how many students or of applicants who went through the normal process and have a license applied versus last year? Is it more or less? And how are you increasing more of these that we have to get on the alternative?
I don't have those exact numbers in front of me. I can tell you, as of about 2 weeks ago, we had hired 240 certified staff to fill vacancies for this year. So that's the 240 plus the vacancies I told you that we still have. And so to answer your question about do I anticipate that that need will increase, if the way it looks now, yes. But we are also increasing our recruiting efforts to move out of really the four-state region and going much more to HBCUs, going out to different places where we can recruit more individuals back. But it's hard to recruit sometimes to Kansas when they can go to a Texas and make 20,000 more. And yeah, so.
Do you think you have more vacancies this year than you did, say, last year?
No, I wouldn't say we have more, but I think where we're at right now in terms of filling them, we're behind a little bit. Yes.
You are behind last
Yes,
year?
yes.
Okay, because I know that there was rather huge one year. Yeah, I remember that.
We
so.
ended up with, I believe, 38 vacancies at the end of the school year this past year that we never did, were never able to fill. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Excuse me. First of all, I'd like to commend your company, your association, or whatever, because you didn't have a very good track record at one time. And you seem to have turned that around. So I really have two questions. But I want to go back to Susan before I ask you the question. Susan or Michelle, we're just used to asking Susan. I am seeing, I got to put this right. Okay. I guess I am seeing a barrier of higher ed being the one that determines whether a person's degree fits qualifications, not in education, but in their architectural degree. We'll just take that. Okay. So the person might go to a different institution, and that institution might say, yeah, you meet our qualifications. However, in the state of Kansas, all higher ed has done a pretty good job of all agreeing on what has to be for a degree. Would we be dumbing down or be considered to be dumbing down our degrees in the state of Kansas if Michelle, your office would see if the content area was enough for teaching and made that decision instead of higher ed? And that barrier of higher ed, is that a statute? Or is that something we can change on our own? That's the barrier I see, right or wrong. That's what, am I interpreting it right?
I guess my response would be that when the reg was built, it's your regulation. It's been in place since 2002. We have 200 plus people on a restricted teaching license every school year. Fort Hays has, just this morning, said we have 150 brand new ones entering this year. So, I mean, it's worked over time, but I think the issue is when they don't have the degree. If you say, what was your degree in? Biology, you're done. Take the biology content test. The analysis, the reason we haven't done it is we don't know what constitutes a major necessarily at any one university. So I think what you're seeing is a variation in what they would view as equivalent coursework based on their university. So there might be a difference in what the Regents versus maybe one of the private institutions.
Okay, now I want to go back to a question for him on that.
Okay.
Your applicants that come to us, are most of them, don't go away, Susan, are most of them right out of school, or are you taking some that have been in business and industry and then come into?
Typically, about 70% of our class every year are folks that are right out of undergraduate or graduate school. So they may have gone straight from undergrad to graduate school.
And they probably have come from a different state than Kansas.
Often, yeah. In fact, the chances are, yeah. So probably 80 to 90% of them every year are not from Kansas, or not educated in Kansas, certainly. And so, but then again, that 30% or so are coming from professions, right? Mid-career changers, or every once in a while we have somebody who's retired and they want to get into the teaching profession and see this as an alternative route to getting into that teaching profession. And then we do have about 20 to 25% every year who are traditionally certified teachers. So they went to a school of ed, but they specifically want to get the training and access to the network that Teach for America provides. And so they join Teach for America because they want to make sure they're getting access to those things.
Okay. I have a trend of thought here. Just let me catch up with it, okay? To take our test, our content test, you know how I love these content tests. Okay, to take the content test, they have to have a degree from one of, okay. We don't let anybody coming into the state that might have a degree from another state but doesn't match any of our degree qualifications at higher ed, take a test.
Right, like I use my daughter always. She's an HR major and has a job in HR. She might consider teaching, but she can't just come in and take a test because she has a great science background and be certified to teach science at the high school level.
Even though she has a 4-year degree.
Correct. She needs that piece that Susan mentioned on the pedagogy, and I think most of us in classroom positions would tell you the pedagogy is as important if.
Well, I don't want to lose the pedagogy, but
Right.
where I'm coming from and I'm seeing our problem is some people come in from out of state with degrees, but our state university won't recognize that they have that degree.
An education degree or a degree in?
No, just a degree in anything, okay? We have a restricted license that if you have a 4-year degree and somebody will hire you, you can get what the restricted
Correct.
and do that. But our problem is they're coming in with these degrees from other states, but our institutions won't recognize their degree, not in education, in any other. Is that right?
I think, I mean, if somebody has a biology from UMKC or University of Nebraska-Lincoln in biology, any of the institutions would say that's fine.
So
If
what,
they have
we
a
go back to
degree-
that Pittsburgh State one, they thought they had a degree, didn't they, from somewhere?
In communications, which could be, take different strands. So I'm sure what they did is they were looking at if somebody was at our university and their major was English language arts, what does that look like?
I think our disconnect, I think our barrier, I think I know where our barrier is. Thank you. I think you've got me.
And remember, the restricted license has been in effect with a couple of adjustments since 2002, so.
Well, if I can jump in, it's not that they're not recognizing the degree. They're saying in order to teach biology in Kansas, you've had to have these courses. You may have a degree in biology, but you didn't get all the courses we would need here at Fort Hays. And I don't think the Department of Ed wants to get in the business of telling Fort Hays who they have to give a degree to.
No, I don't want
So and it is a little frustrating, though, that the different colleges have a different list of courses. Because I have a friend in communications who wanted to be a high school communications teacher, and they kept saying, well, you're missing one course. And she thought, I'm not going back. I've been teaching this at the college level, and if you won't let me teach at high school, that's okay. But, so it is frustrating that the different universities have different lists of courses that would qualify, and that's might be something we'd want to address.
I want to say something positive about the department. I've had numerous calls over the years from people that said, I contacted some university and they said, I've got to take 30 hours in order to get a license. But we have several alternative paths that we've already approved. And so I have, in many of those cases, I probably, in the last 4 or 5 years, a half a dozen at least, even before I got here, said, call and talk to Susan. And if she's not there, hang up. Because and most of those, there was already a way for them to get a license without having to go through that, because we have these alternative licenses. And so I always recommend, I know that we're live streamed, and I hate to say this, but I always encourage people to call here first before they go to university if they have questions about that. Janet.
Thank you. Couple of things. I want to make a comment and ask a question. First of all, we're on a slippery slope, I think, because it's my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, that a degree is not necessarily a degree. You see what I'm saying? And like if you get a degree from Mississippi or you get a degree from North Dakota, that may not be the same degree that you get in Kansas, and I'm not knocking either state, Is that true? That's what I grew to understand, and I thought that was our challenge.
Sure, I think there is variance from college to college on what constitutes X and Y and Z in degree places, and that's individual to each institution. I think some of what might ease your, the barrier question that you're talking about, you heard Susan mention that 2002 was when that restricted license, is that when it came into play, Susan? It's time to look at that again and look at it in regard to barriers and how we might tweak it a bit to make it more amiable for this situation and some others that we run into as well.
Okay, well, since I've been a member of this board, we have fought this. This has been an ongoing battle about barriers to licensure. However, the one thing we have agreed on, and that the board has always agreed on, I'm hoping they still do, is we want to remove barriers, but we want to maintain quality. Right. That's important. We must have high quality, but while removing barriers. And I hope whatever we do, that we will do that, even with this program, which sounds great. I still want high quality for our classrooms. So I guess that's my concern. So I think.
I mentioned to you all in April.
That's why I say caution.
Yes, I've been asked, how low will I lower the bar? And I'm really not interested in lowering it beyond a 4-year degree. A 4-year degree, a 4-year degree, a 4-year degree. Now, how that communications degree might suffice for English language arts in the 7th grade, we have a pathway through the restricted license, and perhaps there are some ways that we can work the regs, tweak some things to make that a little bit more palatable when it comes to those barriers.
Okay, then the one more question, then I'll quit. They will have mentors, is that correct? That's what I thought. Thank you.
You have a pretty robust professional development program.
Oh, my gosh, yeah.
Explain.
I get tired of seeing it on paper. I can't imagine these folks going through it, yeah.
And let me remind my colleagues that we're here to talk about Teach for America.
Well, can I just say one
we've
thing
delved
this?
into other
So
things.
Where I normally see this come into play, and the communications example is a good one, but it typically is in the sciences, and it's when it's one versus the other, right? And so one way that I've seen other states get around this is that they will ensure, the requirement for a provisional cert will say something about having to meet sort of ongoing requirements, which we talk about, the coursework, the pedagogy, all those sorts of things that our program provides. They'll also say you have to have a closely aligned degree, right? So that then gives some ability for you to, for this, let's say this communications person, for the district to say, well, that's a closely aligned degree. They may not have, may have not checked every box, but it's very closely aligned and we believe they can do it. And then the last thing is that they pass some sort of content exam with a certain mark. And so in the science example, for instance, that allows somebody with the biology to maybe say, you know what, I actually think I can pass the chemistry content exam and can teach that. My degree is closely aligned. It's a 4-year degree. It's closely aligned to in a science field. And the school partner has an opening that they would like to hire me for in that space. That's kind of how I've seen that work. But that's, I think, again, a part of a longer conversation. What I will say is that the 9 that we're on track to place next year all have a pathway that exists currently.
And Kathy has a question. Go ahead, Kathy.
Thank you. Now, I apologize because this may have been asked before I was able to get online, and if so, let me know and I can go back and listen to the earlier part. But what about expansion into our other urban areas in Kansas? Because Kansas City, Kansas is not the only area that's urban and has needs. Of course, you know, obviously board members will know I'm talking about Wichita, but also the urban areas of western Kansas.
Yeah, our hope is to continue to expand in the longer term as we're able to have, I think, a few more streamlined pathways for certification for these folks. Part of the barrier operationally that we run into is that we do provide our folks with a teacher coach, and they have a small cohort of teachers that their job is to be in those classrooms, observing them and giving them feedback and getting them really good really fast, right? And so that is something that if our teacher coaches have a cohort of folks that are, you know, most of 90% of them are in the Kansas City market, and then they have 2 in Western Kansas. Operationally, that's just not gonna, we're not maximizing that coach's time, and so it becomes a challenge. But I do think as we're able to place potentially clusters of folks in other markets, Topeka and Wichita are 2 that come to mind, we could have a coach that resides over in this part of the state and be able to serve both adequately.
No, the Wichita area has thousands of teachers. So I would not doubt that you would be able to get the capacity. Have you reached out to some of these other districts to try to at least begin to establish conversations about starting a partnership?
At this point, no, because again, this school year that just wrapped, we had 2 teachers in KCK district, right? And the hope was through this expansion to have nearly 10, right? Which we have a path for. And as we continue to grow that partnership and learn, as Jim, you mentioned, we don't know what you don't know. I think part of some of the shifts, and I forget which board member just mentioned it, part of some of our shifts is that we don't like making promises we can't deliver on. And so we're really very deliberate about how we go about expanding, not just to put people in rooms with kids, but to make sure that they're set up for success, to have a long career in this space, and to make sure that the students there have the high bar that they would expect. So we haven't had those conversations yet. But that's part of what our longer term aim is here for that. And let me just, like one point we were talking about, I am fully behind this notion that the best way to raise the bar for students is to keep the bar high for adults, right? So I am in no way recommending lowering a bar in any way for the adults that we put in front of students.
Well, I would encourage you to reach out to some of these other urban areas sooner rather than later to begin to establish those partnerships. When you had a natural partnership to start with in the KCK area, which I applaud you and KCK for that, but I think there's other folks that would be very interested and willing to have a conversation with you and get started. And if you have any desire to do that, well, there are certainly board members that can put you in contact with the right people.
Well, I appreciate that.
Mr. Chair. It'll happen after I leave this position, but as this is maybe a bit of a simplified way of looking at things, and that's usually the way I look at them, is that we have some alternative routes to teaching already established. I envision that down the road, Teach for America could be just one of those approved alternate routes to teaching in Kansas schools when they've demonstrated the kinds of the kind of quality that we're looking for. And I think that would certainly, I hope to hear one day that that's happened and that we, because I think that would be a really positive step to bring some quality, high quality teaching professionals into the state of Kansas to become Kansas residents and teachers. Thank you.
Kelly?
I want to ask my second question. I didn't get to ask. What do you think your company did or your business did that turned it around to be something that we will actually look at and be more positive? What do you think the changes that you made was, because I really, even though we're in a crunch time and we need to look for different ways for teachers, we're not going to look at anything that isn't quality. I think you have a program now that we might want to look at and look more into. So what do you think the changes have been made over to make your company the quality we want to look at?
Yeah, I think there were two. So let me tell you a little bit. There are two big changes, and I'll tell you what I think they've been. But when I even came to this work, I did not do Teach for America. Spencer did Teach for America, and he's an exceptional example of how the sort of the caliber of folks that are produced through this. And if I were to really want to embarrass him, I talk about how he led his students to some of the highest math scores in the state of Missouri when he was a teacher, right? But I'll try not to give his resume. But Spencer's a guy who, graduated from Harvard and got recruited to go teach at a charter school through Teach for America in Dallas, and then went on to Goldman Sachs and ultimately found his way back into education, right? And I think you're seeing that be the path for more and more folks. But I think you also see a lot of folks who sort of follow a path like mine, which is that I grew up in the community served. So I grew up in urban Kansas City in a low-income community and understand sort of firsthand what the effects of poverty and sort of race and some of those things can have on somebody's educational trajectory. And so when I came to this work, one thing that I was really committed to was making sure that the people we're putting forward are people I'd want my kids in classrooms with. That was always my litmus test. When I went into a classroom, would I send my kids to this school? Would I send my kids to this teacher? I have 5 girls. They're all 6 and under, and I take that litmus test very, very seriously. And so we hold a really high bar for our folks. We also know that they're not going to be Teachers of the Year week 1. In fact, they're going to fail. And for a lot of these folks, this is the first time in their early careers they failed at anything at all, right? High GPAs, class presidents, stars with whatever sports they're part of. And so it's really important for us to find a way with those folks to encourage them that failing is part of their growth process, right? So fail fast, iterate, get better, and that's what we see happen with our folks in the classroom. The 2 big shifts that I think have happened were twofold. One was when we used to recruit folks, we recruited them on a 2-year program, and we said, hey, you're going to go off to law school, you're going to go to medical school, you're going to go into an engineering firm or an accounting firm. Why don't you defer that for 2 years and come teach? And it was completely service-oriented, right? Do this, like AmeriCorps is how it was really pitched. Do this for 2 years and you're done, right? And instead now when they're on campuses recruiting, they're recruiting people to sign up for a lifetime commitment to working on this problem that begins with 2 years in the classroom. And when it's done, it may end up being 4, 5, 6, 7, 10. They may end up deciding that's their career path, or they may decide, you know what, I actually do want to go on to law school. But whatever they end up doing, we are really convicted about the fact that they're going to always be a part of this work in some way, shape, or form, right? And so that ends up being that, yeah, I'm going to leave the classroom, I'm going to use my classroom experience, I'm going to go to law school, but I'm going to go run for office, and I'm going to be a policymaker who helps shape and inform ed policy, right? It may be somebody who decides, yep, I'm going to go to medical school, but I want to start a clinic that's adjoined to a school that provides some wraparound services for a student population because they can't quite adequately learn in the classroom if they have health ailments that they're not financially capable of resolving on their own. And so I think that was one big shift. I think the second big shift was there was quite a bit of savior complex that was happening with our program. So when they recruited people, the belief was you're going to go into communities and you're going to save them, right? And they may not have said it explicitly, but when you looked at who the people were that we were highlighting as our champions and successes, they met that profile, right? And so we have very clearly changed our orientation to, instead of doing work to communities, doing work with communities. So we try to, and I think we've certainly maybe made some missteps in how we've tried to do that here, but we certainly are trying to more organically, by working with schools that have needs and hearing what they have and seeing where there is some alignment between what we can offer and how we can work together toward those goals. I think those are the two biggest orientation shifts that we've had as an organization. Yeah, and it ends up rippling down into everything.
I thought you were going to give us more specific facts that we could just grab onto and follow your lead. But philosophy goes a long way, and who you look at in recruiting and your attitude approach.
Well,
So
I mean,
thank you.
Well, realistically, the philosophy ends up, so our selection model, when we used to select people, it was solely, they've added a section that's all about grit. And it's like company secrets or whatever, but there's a component that is around grit and resilience, and there's also a component that we evenly score around their experience working in the communities that we're serving, right? And so previously, you could be sort of a upper middle class, highly educated Ivy League graduate that had every advantage in the world and sort of hit all the boxes from the achievement side, but actually couldn't give a lot of really concrete examples of how you had to push through and persist and fight to sort of achieve something of significance. And you also didn't have experience in working in low-income communities or being from a low-income community. And so when you look back at sort of the diversity stats, a lot of that came from that philosophical shift, which then turned into an operational shift in how we're ranking candidates, which then turned into the population that we have in the program, which ultimately ends up leading to some of the successful stats that you've been able to see.
Thank you. You say fail fast, learn from it, and move on, something like that. How many people actually wash out? I know they have to go through hell, and you take roughly 10% of your applicants or so.
Yeah.
How many actually wash out and don't work out? What percentage?
We retain 95% plus that start first day of school and make it through the end of their 2-year program.
Okay, I would say that's pretty good, but some people just aren't cut out for it, or life changes or whatever. So I'm going to share just a little bit of my philosophy. I got an engineering degree, and I'm a math teacher, and I'm going to retire to a math classroom. That's been my plan since I was 17 years old, and I'm on track to do that. I wish we'd have met earlier in my life. My wife would shoot me if I took a job for $36K. She wouldn't have it. And she's my angel on earth. She wouldn't let me do it. My philosophy is this. We don't evaluate teachers enough, and I'm guessing you evaluate your teachers tremendously. And I think one of the fundamental flaws in our system, from 30,000 feet or whatever, is that we rely on these licensure and certifications to ensure, we use that word all the time, to ensure that we're going to have quality. And we put them in a classroom. And some people are good, some people are mediocre, some people just aren't very good at it. But they've paid a lot of money to have this licensure and certification, and so some people just stick it out when they shouldn't. And I think one of the difficulties we have is we don't evaluate our teachers enough. And there are some who need coaching up, there are some who need professional development, but there's this tendency to treat all teachers the same. That's certainly the way we pay them as postal clerks. And the fourth-year teacher automatically makes more money than the third-year teacher in a given district. And I'm probably going to have to go bowling with the commissioner again to discuss whether the future of educators is more toward being a public servant, a civil servant, like a police officer or firefighter, which is pretty close to where we are a lot of times, or if we're truly going to be professionals who are responsible for our own professional development and buy our own tools and are truly more professional. One of my talking points is that our teachers' unions should morph toward being professional associations. That's a huge political lift. but so is changing schools. And this board, I think, as respectfully as I can say it, has just turned a corner very recently. We actually want to change the system now. I mean, I've wanted to change it for 30 years, but now this board actually wants to change the way we do school. And I hope you can be a part of that. And to Ken's point, that you could be another spoke on our wagon wheel. You've probably seen our wagon wheel for licensure, right? I would advocate that we have 2 licenses, initial and professional, but that's also a heavy lift. So thank you for your presentation. It's been very enlightening. Thank you very much.
I hear you said you were going to be, it was not going to be diplomatic. That was very diplomatic.
Dina and Ann.
Thank you. I'm going to be a little more specific and focus on an area that you have under recruiting, training, and placing teachers. When you talk about a dedicated teacher coach, is this someone that you've selected, or is it someone that the district selects
So
as a mentor for that particular person? And I'm assuming that that person isn't necessarily a person who has, well, the same background as the teacher as far as their pedagogy, or not their pedagogy, but their course of study, but someone who does have excellent pedagogy skills. So could you address what you're looking for in that arena, and whether it's partnership with the district or whether you are the only one that selects?
Yes. So thanks for the question. So our teacher coach is distinct from the mentor. That was the question earlier, right? So in the KCK district, for instance, they have a mentor that's been assigned. That is distinct from the teacher coach. The teacher coach is a staff position that we have on our team that, again, is they're all former educators themselves that have taught for many years. Some of them were traditionally certified. Some of them came through the Teach for America program. But all of them had quite a number of years of teaching experience, and then transition to coaching, and they are trained and built up as professionals to your point in the field of adult coaching, right? So they are there to coach a new teacher and help them get up to speed really, really fast. In our space, the things that and let me switch slight gears. So your question about working with the schools, it works a little different with each school, but they are not, our coaches go into schools and they partner with them very early. So they are going to design professional development sessions and implement those for our folks outside of the school setting, but they also are going to work with the instructional support staff that the school and the district itself has. So that varies school to school. Some of the schools that we serve have no instructional support staff. Some of them have very intensive instructional support teams in their building, but they work with them very closely to align on what the development goals are for each individual teacher that they're supporting in that building. And then they are an extra body basically in the building that is going in, observing, getting feedback to the teacher, and then coordinating with the school to say, hey, this Teach for America teacher that we have in your building, here's how they've been performing, and here's what I saw. And if there's areas where they actually are seeing different trends in that teacher's development than what the instructional support or principal staff is seeing, then the coach and the principal staff sync up, and maybe they go visit together and make sure they're actually working toward the same goals for a given school building.
Okay.
Ann.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. It's very helpful. And I know you guys have been around long enough. You have a lot of data now. And, you know, we have a conference coming up on teacher recruitment and retention, and our numbers aren't real great. I mean, we lose a lot of teachers the first 5 years. So how many teachers do you lose the first 5 years?
So they actually just did this in the state of Missouri to try to look at our work, and they found that, and I wish I'll follow up with you and get you the exact number, but they found that our folks were having the same or better retention rates at a 5-year point than any other path that they had going in.
Okay.
So the tricky thing that we have with the way we manage data with our program is that we're really good at tracking them when they are part of our program, and once they're no longer obligated to work with us, it's sort of on good faith that they're going to take their survey and they're going to let us know what they're up to. And so our data when they become alums past the 2 years is a little, in my opinion, a little less reliable. We can look at LinkedIn pages and things and try to get that, but it's we don't have the same level of purview into exactly what they're teaching where and so forth. For us, what I can speak to is that of our alumni population in the Kansas City region, so the 400 or so of them, 65%, right around that 65% number are still actively teaching, right? And so we've been there for 10 years or so, and so you get an idea. It's not a perfect number, but you get an idea of how many of them are still actively in the classroom.
Because one article I read said that you guys lose 80% of them after 3 years, so I was hoping that wasn't right.
Well, and here's the thing. I think it varies widely region by region. And in our region, we spend a lot of time on that point of it's not a 2-year commitment, it's a lifetime commitment. And we also spend quite a bit of time talking to our folks that we want them to make impact as leaders in this space wherever they have the greatest ability to make change. But one thing that we do talk to them about is that spending more than 2 years in the classroom really does improve their street cred whenever they get into whatever they're doing, right? And so 2 years is a start, but if maybe they haven't had a great experience with a particular partner, as opposed to them giving up on the teaching profession altogether, we've encouraged them maybe find another placement site and give it another shot for another couple of years. So we have a much better rate in the Kansas City region than elsewhere for sure.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. It's been very enlightening. I've learned a lot.
Well, I've learned a lot too, and I will say I'm not actually sure what next steps are on this. I know, and so the point about not knowing what you don't know, I know we have the line item in the budget, but I'm not sure if there needs to be a vote in this body about.
It does, and it'll be on the agenda in August.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you all so much for the time. And I'll be sure to pass along our contact information if you'd like to reach out with any other questions, okay?
Do that with Peggy, please.
Okay, will do. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And we are adjourned.
Released. Praise God.
All right.
I don't need